Chapter 217. Although looming shadow saw that his target was right in front of him, he didn't act rashly because he had become a little more reserved. "How did you get in?" Geraint asked as he looked at Hidden Shadow. "City Lord, it's not that I want to criticize you, but your city's defenses are full of loopholes compared to the Middle Empires. Why can't we get in?" Hidden Shadow said with a mocking tone. However, Geraint did not get angry. Instead, he nodded gently and said, "That's true. However, this is inevitable. After all, it has been several hundred years since someone dared to attack a city in the Divine Dragon Empire." "What do you mean?" Hidden Shadow pouted as he looked out the window. Outside, the fire was in full swing. The sound of water splashing and shouting rang out endlessly. However, the fire still lit up half the sky. After such a long time, the Red Dragon Society's people did not obstruct them. However, the fire did not weaken at all. Geraint remained calm. "This is normal. Rueyun City was built by the sea. Since it was built, there has never been a fire. City Lord, you really govern by doing nothing," Hidden Shadow exclaimed. "Well said." Geraint nodded. Then, he looked at the red-robed men behind Hidden Shadow and asked, "Who are these people?" "Naturally, they're the big gifts that my Red Dragon Society prepared for you, City Lord." Hidden Shadow casually gestured at the red-robed men behind him, as if they were some kind of commodity. The red-robed men were so angry that their hats trembled slightly. "Your society really thinks highly of me," Geraint said. "Of course," Hidden Shadow said. "However, since we have invested so much, I believe that City Lord will not let us return empty-handed, right? What do you want?" Geraint narrowed his eyes. Although he withdrew the cold and ferocious glint in his eyes, he gave off an even more dangerous feeling. He looked like a coiled snake preparing to pounce on its prey. "We want this city," Hidden Shadow said indifferently. There was no fear on his face. "This city has nothing," Geraint said. "It can even be said to be isolated from the world. If you want to rebel, I don't think you'll set your base camp in Divine Dragon City. Of course, we have to find a place isolated from the world to accumulate strength." Geraint was stunned. Although everyone knew that the Red Dragon Society had big plans, they did not expect them to be this big. This was a delusional attempt to overturn the universe. "It seems that you've determined that I'm doomed today." Geraint looked at Shadow and said, "City Lord, why do you say that?" Yu Ing said innocently, "But you're right. The people behind me are 4 peak 5th Order and 2 6th Order. Moreover, each of them has experienced hundreds of battles. Under such circumstances, I really don't think the City Lord has any room to turn things around." "Ha ha." Geraint looked up to the sky and laughed. He said to Shadow, "Good, good, good. Well done. Your Excellency really lives up to the name of Shadow." Sure enough, it was full of changes and unpredictable. "You risked your life to enter my auspicious cloud city alone and figured out the layout of my city as well as the layout of the city. Then, like the silent spring rain, they sent people to infiltrate my Rueyun City one after another to make preparations for the fire. It seemed like a crazy move, but it was also a ploy to lure the tiger away from the mountain. Seizing the opportunity when I had no soldiers by my side, he trapped me, causing me to be like a tiger falling from the sky, a dragon trapped in the shallows. Like a turtle in a jar. City Lord, you're exaggerating." Shadow cupped his fists and said, "It's just a small trick, not worth mentioning, not worth mentioning." "What a pity." Geraint suddenly sighed. "What's a pity?" Shadow asked. "It's a pity that you're not familiar with the City Lord command, and you're not decisive enough." Geraint said faintly, "The reason why the fire didn't weaken is because the soldiers of Auspicious Cloud City didn't participate. Now, the ones putting out the fire are some civilians, so it's so chaotic." Shadow stared at Geraint, silently holding the long sword at his waist. "Since my soldiers didn't go to put out the fire, where do you think they are?" Geraint said. There was no need to guess. The fire was so big, but the soldiers didn't go to put out the fire. Naturally, there was something more important than putting out the fire. What could be more important than putting out the fire? Of course, there were the evil cultists, the newly promoted traitors and traitors, Shadow, There's a large army coming towards us. We're surrounded, a red-robed man said anxiously. Not long after, the sound of dong 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 came from the stairs, and 3 red-robed men ran up. Ewing slowly stood up. These 3 people were specially left behind to guard the escape route. But these 3 people appeared here, which meant there was no way out. Just as Ewing was about to say something, 2 more sounds of wind breaking could be heard. 2 more red-robed men rushed in from the window. Shadow looked at the 2 men, thinking this is the 2nd floor. Although it's not high, how urgent is it that these 2 men didn't even have time to go up the stairs? Do they have to jump on the roof? There are people downstairs, the red-robed man who came up last simply said. Shadow glanced at Shadow, got up, walked to the window, and looked down. With just a glance, Shadow withdrew his gaze. I'm afraid all the soldiers of auspicious Cloud City are here. Countless heavily armed soldiers blocked all the roads outside this small tea house. A little further away, there were hundreds of armor-piercing crossbows, aimed here without any blind spots. It seemed that if anyone wanted to escape through the window, they would be shot into a miserable hedgehog. The people of the Red Dragon sect were not disciples of the King Kong sect, so they didn't have any defensive techniques. The red robes of the Red Dragon sect were not made of precious materials, but like cloth robes, they couldn't block the arrows of the armor-piercing crossbows. There were no legendary powerhouses of the 8th rank present, and no one could release aura, form armor, and be invulnerable to swords and spears. To put it simply, they were trapped. In the blink of an eye, the situation reversed, and Shadow and the others became turtles in a jar. The City Lord's token naturally has the ability to command the army in the city. As long as you're in the City Lord's token can contact all the troops. Geraint said, But City Lord, did you forget? You're still in our hands. What are you showing off for? Shadow glared at Geraint and said coldly, As long as we can take down the City Lord, who would dare to not surrender? Geraint shrugged indifferently. Look, what are they doing? A red-robed man cried out in alarm. Shadow stared blankly, walked to the window again, and carefully looked down, only to see that the soldiers below had placed branches and straw in the corner of the tea house. Shadow looked at the red-robed man and said with a sneer, You still don't understand? They're setting us on fire to burn us to death. City Lord, you're quite creative. Shadow looked at Geraint and said, Not bad. I think you'll like this way of dying. Geraint smiled happily, his eyes narrowed. Chapter 218. Gathering the Red Dragon followers, who worshipped fire and believe in the Red Dragon god, and clamoring to use the holy fire to purify the world, would burn them all to death. To the Divine Dragon Empire's nobles, this was indeed an excellent idea. As Dark Shadow looked at Geraint, he suddenly felt like he understood a lot. He had fallen into a trap. Is there any way to charge out? Dark Shadow asked as he looked at the red-robed men with a sliver of hope. Without exception, all the red-robed men shook their heads. Although this scene was within Dark Shadow's expectations, his heart could not help sinking. All of this was premeditated. Geraint used the entire auspicious Cloud City as a trap to lure them into the trap. No wonder the Red Dragon followers could infiltrate auspicious Cloud City so easily. No wonder the soldiers could sift out the experts Dark Shadow left behind to guard the escape route from the complicated streets and alleys. No wonder Geraint did not feel any heartache when he saw the overwhelming fire. Geraint could even calmly converse with Dark Shadow. Indeed, compared to killing evil sect members and traitors like himself, the losses were naturally nothing. Your Excellency Dark Shadow, I advise you not to waste your efforts. Geraint even took out a folding fan and opened it. Then, he gently fanned himself. To capture you people, my auspicious Cloud City suffered heavy losses. I believe your Excellency will not let me lose everything, right? Dark Shadow clenched his fist tightly. What Geraint said was what he had just said outside the city. He did not expect to be returned to him so quickly. Take him down. Dark Shadow could not be bothered to say anything more. If he dilly-dallied for a while longer, the soldiers might set the city on fire. At that time, he would truly be in a pinch. If he took down Geraint now and obtained the City Lord's token, he still had a chance to turn defeat into victory. The red-robed men had been waiting impatiently for this sentence for a long time. As soon as Bane's voice fell, the two red-robed men rushed out. The red-robed men let out loud, flapping noises. Geraint picked up the teacup in his hand and tossed it at Dark Shadow. It looked like he wanted to make a final gamble or drag someone down with him before he died. The full-powered toss of a rank 6 expert, a city lord, naturally had a horrifying momentum. Even an ordinary teacup became extremely terrifying. The green porcelain teacup turned into a green light and shot towards Ying. An armored arm shield appeared in front of Ying in a split second, as if he had expected this. Dang! The shield made a loud noise, and the red-robed man couldn't help but take a step back. What a pity, Geraint whispered. Under Geraint's regretful gaze, the celadone teacup turned into a cluster of fine celadone powder and scattered in the air. It was bright and shiny and looked very beautiful. Geraint used this one and only chance to attack Shadow, so he had no chance to resist the two red-robed men. Logically speaking, there were only two paths for Geraint to take at this time. He could either surrender or be executed. However, Geraint was no ordinary Tier 6 powerhouse. He was also the Divine Dragon Empire's City Lord. The black and cold City Lord token shone brightly without any warning. The two red-robed men were shocked. They each took out a short sword from somewhere and directly stabbed at Geraint. The two short swords seemed to be a pair. Moreover, there were beautiful lightning patterns on them. Even an ignorant child could tell at a glance that they were not ordinary items. A stage 6 powerhouse wielding such a godly weapon, even if it was piercing through gold and splitting rocks, it would be a common thing. However, when these two swords touched the light emitted by the City Lord token, they actually stopped abruptly. No matter how hard the two Tier 6 powerhouses tried, they couldn't advance even an inch. The City Lord token was indeed extraordinary. It actually forced two Tier 6 Red Dragon followers to retreat. In the blink of an eye, from a moment the two red-robed men pounced, to Geraint throwing the teacup at Ying, and finally forcing the two red-robed men to retreat with the City Lord token. Only a short moment passed. Even before Ying could react, the matter was already over. Ying looked through the shield in front of him and saw the shattered porcelain teacup floating in the air. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, I was smart and made arrangements in advance. This teacup was too fast. I couldn't react at all. If I was hit by it, I would be seriously injured even if I didn't die. In young lightning? Geraint asked suspiciously. I didn't expect the Red Dragon sect to mobilize the two of you for me. Geraint's voice pulled Ying out of his rejoicing mood. It made him return to the cruel reality that he was still in a predicament. Yang Lightning was the name of the two swords. The swords were split into Yin and Yang. When they danced, there was the sound of thunder. When they were combined, they were invincible. These two swords had caused a lot of bloodshed in the Divine Dragon Empire. Many rich and heartless people had died under these two swords. However, they failed to pierce through this city today. I didn't expect the City Lord token to have such an ability. Ying said bitterly. The entire city's power to protect one person. Ying's expression turned very ugly. If he couldn't take down Geraint, it would be very difficult for him to be kind today. Your Excellency, you don't have to do this. Seeing Ying's ugly expression, Geraint comforted him instead. I'm also very regretful that I didn't manage to take your life with the attack just now. For some reason, Ying sneered. What do you have to regret, City Lord? Before Ying finished speaking, the tip of his nose twitched involuntarily. Suddenly, he smelled a strange scent. This smell suddenly appeared, and it was very abrupt. However, Ying faintly felt that it was somewhat familiar. It was a bit like the incense that he and Lord Sword Saint went to the ancestral hall of Sword Mountain to pray and lit up. However, in the next moment, Ying knew that he was wrong because that smell suddenly became very pungent and strong. There were also pa sounds coming from outside the window. They lit a fire. The red-robed man, who had been hiding behind the window, shouted loudly. Impossible. This was Ying's first thought. He concluded that it was impossible for the people below to set a fire. So he stayed here with a group of people. Even if they were surrounded by the enemy, he didn't care at all. Even if they piled firewood on the wall below, it didn't matter. The reason was simple, because Geraint was still here. With the city lord here, who would dare to set a fire? Unless there was a very ambitious guy who wanted to burn the previous city lord to death and then take over. However, Ewing felt that this kind of melodramatic thing shouldn't happen to him. Then there was only one possibility. That was, Geraint ordered the fire himself. You order people to set the fire? Shadow bluntly asked the question in his mind. Sure enough, Geraint nodded gently, confirming his guess. How did you order the people below? Was it also the city lord token? Geraint shook his head gently and smiled slightly. No, it was a signal by smashing the cup. Chapter 219. The raging fire began to burn. The billowing smoke rushed in through the windows and instantly turned the white walls black. The soldiers outside were still on standby, holding the army destroyer crossbows and aiming at the doors and windows of the tea house. They didn't even blink, afraid that they would miss a moment, because they couldn't guarantee that the evil cultists inside wouldn't be able to take it anymore and break out of the window or something. This was a common method used by hunters when hunting. They lit a fire at the entrance of the prey's nest and let the smoke enter the nest. When the prey couldn't take it anymore and rushed out, the hunter would wait outside. They had already made all the preparations. They either set up traps or waited with loaded crossbows in their hands. This tactic could not be considered brilliant, let alone innovative. It was just like the breaking cup as a signal. It was an old tactic used by countless humans. This tactic didn't have the slightest surprise effect, but it was very stable. It was like a man over 50 years old. Although there was no surprise, there was no accident. Sir Mayor, I still have one thing I don't understand. Although Shadow was already burning with anxiety, he still forced himself to calm down and asked aloud. But the slightly anxious gaze in his eyes couldn't be concealed. Compared to him, the rest of the Red Dragon sect seemed much calmer. They looked really calm, as if they really felt that even if they were burned to death, they would get what they wanted. Please speak. Geraint seemed to be equally calm. He even smiled and nodded to Shadow. Shadow frowned slightly and couldn't help but glance around. He thought to himself, am I the only one who's anxious now? Are these people crazy? Isn't this place about to be engulfed by the fire? Do you really think that you're not afraid of being burned by the fire because you believe in Jilin? Or is it that the fire doesn't hurt? Is the effect of religious brainwashing so good? Shadow forcibly suppressed the thoughts in his heart, looked at Geraint, and asked, Sir Mayor, you're still here, but you ordered the fire. Do you want to die with us? Although your City Lord's token can withstand the combined attack of a Tier 6 powerhouse, it probably can't withstand the high temperature of the flames. Even if the flames can't burn you, you'll be roasted alive. In the end, the difference between you and us is that we are a pile of charcoal, and you are a piece of smoked meat. As Shadow spoke, the smoke in the tea house became thicker and thicker. The temperature was also rising. The thick black smoke was mixed with a lot of dust. Just breathing in it would make people cough nonstop. The thick smoke had begun to obscure Shadow's vision. However, he could clearly sense that his companions were already sitting cross-legged on the ground. No one knew if it was to avoid the smoke above, or if it had already given up hope and was sitting there waiting for death. Hee, that's an interesting metaphor. Geraint's face began to sweat. But what do you mean by that? I'm just trying to help the City Lord understand the situation and advise the City Lord to let the people below put out the fire. Shadow said. Ha! Cough, cough. Geraint threw his head back and laughed. However, he couldn't help but start coughing violently. It seemed like he had inhaled 2 large mouthfuls of smoke due to his laughter. It seemed that Shadow was right. Not only was the City Lord's token unable to withstand the high temperature, but it was also unable to withstand the dust in the thick smoke. What are you laughing at? Shadow was not in the mood to laugh at Geraint's embarrassing appearance and asked anxiously, I'm laughing at you. Geraint's face was full of tears, and he couldn't even open his eyes. No one knew if he was laughing or choking. Laughing at me? I didn't expect the famous Shadow in the Red Dragon Society to be a false believer. You're actually afraid of fire. Just because I'm afraid of fire? Yes. What kind of existence do the people of the Red Dragon Society have in your hearts? A lunatic who worships fire, a whimsical, delusional person. Is such a person worthy of being burned by fire with you? Dying together? It's worth it. Why? Shadow was puzzled. The last time he saw Geraint, although they were also enemies, it was only because they were in different camps. There was no personal grudge between them. At that time, Geraint was even willing to say a few words to him. But this time, Shadow felt as if they were the ones who killed Geraint's entire family. This guy was the one who wanted to fight them to the death. This was indeed something that Shadow did not expect. His methods were so ruthless and decisive. It was as if he was going to perish together with them. Because of the time you took action, Geraint said leisurely. Although his tone was slow, it was sharp. It was as if he really saw the enemy who killed his father and couldn't live under the same sky. You are the first people who dare to do such a thing during the rising tide. Therefore, His Majesty the Hero King personally ordered that we must kill the chicken to warn the monkey so that the future generations can learn from it. The rising tide has always been a major event, and there is no room for error. No one has ever dared to be impudent. Therefore, you must die, and you must die in a shocking manner. Shadow only understood when he heard Geraint's words. So that's how it is. No wonder Geraint was so ruthless and did not leave any room for negotiation. He used himself as bait just to make them die a little more ugly. It turned out that the rising tide really couldn't be taken lightly. It turned out that the Divine Dragon Empire also had a spy in the Red Dragon Society, and that spy was right beside him. Otherwise, the Hero King wouldn't have known in advance and given such an order. Shadow understood and nodded at Geraint. Then he got up and walked to the middle of the red-robed men, wanting to lean against the wall and sit down. They were waiting for death together. As soon as Shadow leaned against the wall, he felt that something was wrong and hurriedly moved forward. The raging fire outside was burning the wall. Now, the wall was very hot. He admitted defeat. As the lord of a city, Geraint could perish together with them. No one could have predicted this. Speaking of which, Shadow had only been in the Divine Dragon Empire for a year. During this period, he had devised countless schemes and cheated many people. Some of those people had higher realms than him, and some were smarter than him. However, they were all cheated by him. It was fate, but it was also, as he and Reese had said, his bottom line was lower than theirs. It could be considered exciting and soul-stirring. However, they were all daunting but not dangerous. It was only today that Shadow had truly lost their hand. He didn't expect that he would lose his life this time. He felt a little indignant when he thought about it, but it was nothing. He had cheated many people to death. Shadow admitted that his life was not more valuable than those people's. Moreover, the city lord had risked his life to accompany him this time. Just now, Shadow asked Geraint if it was worth it. Geraint said yes. Now, Shadow felt that he was quite worth it. The black smoke grew bigger and bigger. It gradually occupied the entire upper floor and was still spreading downwards. It wasn't that Shadow didn't think of going downstairs, but the temperature downstairs was even higher. Only now did Shadow realize that he had thought wrong about one thing. That fire couldn't burn in at all. Most of the buildings in Ruiyun City, including this tea house, were made of stone. Wooden village was rarely used. Ruiyun City was close to the sea. Being close to the sea meant that there was a lot of humidity. With high humidity, the wood was easily damp and easily rotted. Therefore, unless it was set up in advance by those fire experts like the Red Dragon sect, it would be very difficult to burn from the inside out. Therefore, it was wrong for Shadow to say that he and the others would become a pile of charcoal and be directly burned to death. They should have been suffocated to death by the thick smoke or roasted to death. Bang! Shadow took out a pitch-black short sword from his sleeve. The pitch-black short sword didn't reflect a glimmer of light. The pure black seemed to be able to suck in people's eyes. Although Shadow had never used this short sword after learning the no-return sword from the Sword Saint, he had always worn it close to his body and had never left it. Because this was a weapon made by the dwarves for Shadow. It was extremely precious. Shadow looked at this simple and beautiful short sword and felt a little lonely. Who would have thought that after a year, This sword would once again reveal its sharpness, but in the end, it would be used on him. Shadow planned to kill himself with his own hands. Shadow wasn't a brainless Red Dragon sect member. He didn't want to be burned to death. Compared to being roasted to death or choked to death by the thick smoke, it was obviously more straightforward and more satisfying to stab himself with a knife. He would suffer less. Shadow held a sharp weapon that could cut his hair and pointed it at all the vital parts of his body. He gritted his teeth fiercely. In the end, he couldn't make up his mind that, "I'm sorry, everyone. Who wants a quick death? If you can't do it yourself, let me help you." Shadow looked at the motionless red-robed people sitting on the ground and asked carefully. These people had all fallen into such a desperate situation because of his stubborn plan. Everyone opposed this plan, but he didn't listen. "Shadow, if you lose, you lose. Don't let others look down on our Red Dragon sect. If you can't do it yourself, I can help you. Being burned to death is the way our Red Dragon sect should die." That's right, that's right. We're already in the fire. How can our Red Dragon sect members find another way? Shadow, if you can't stand it, I'll send you on your way. Don't embarrass yourself anymore. Shadow looked helplessly at his companions who hadn't shown their faces so far. He couldn't say anything. He just put away the short sword. Perhaps humans were like this. They would always have hope until the last moment, even if it meant paying a greater price. Suddenly a low laugh sounded. Shadow glanced at Geraint and ignored him. He felt that this person was really hopeless. He and the red-robed people were sitting on the ground. He wanted to lie down because the air above was getting more and more polluted. But only that person was still sitting on the stool with an indifferent expression. He still maintained the demeanor of a city lord. When he first saw Geraint, Shadow felt that this person liked to put on airs. Now he didn't think so. How was this liking? This was simply love. This was using his life to show off. Shadow gave Geraint a thumbs up in his heart. At this time, he was really convinced. The thick smoke finally drowned Shadow's face. He choked and coughed nonstop. Most of the red-robed people were the same. At this time, there was no difference between a rank 6 powerhouse and a rank 3 powerhouse like Shadow. As for Geraint's side, there was no sound. Shadow had probably choked and fainted. Who asked him to sit so high? However, he was also a ruthless person. He didn't cough again before he fainted. Although Shadow felt that he should be holding it in, he couldn't help but admire him. Because he couldn't help it, Shadow coughed louder and louder. The more he coughed, the more smoke he inhaled. His lungs began to hurt violently. His throat felt like it was on fire, until Shadow's consciousness began to fade. Am I going to die? Where would I go after I die? According to Qilin, hell was filled with thick smoke and fire. The human undead were burned by the raging flames and suffered all kinds of torment. Isn't that the same as now? I don't want to go there. According to Staya, heaven was not bad. It was the territory of God. As long as humans went there, they would be peaceful and happy. It sounded good, but when he thought about what he had done recently, it seemed that going to heaven was a bit difficult. According to Aisha, people wouldn't go there even if they died. They would simply be gone. Simply gone. They would lose their consciousness and wouldn't be able to feel anything. They wouldn't be able to feel anything, not even themselves. That was the greatest horror in the world. Shadow felt that compared to Aisha's words, he wanted to go to the hell that Qilin said more. Am I wrong? If I listened to Jilin's words and came here to ask for information about the Elven Island in a low-key manner and didn't get involved in the matters here, would I be wandering around a street in the Divine Dragon Empire right now? Instead of becoming a piece of bacon, Shadow was already lying on the ground. He couldn't even cough. He even regretted that he didn't give himself a quick death just now. He used his trembling hand to touch the scar on his eye with great difficulty. He thought of the little girl that was killed by the soldiers as he was about to die. Yu Ying's mouth twitched slightly, and he grinned. I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. No one is wrong. Shadow's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. However, he had already used all his strength to say those words. Shadow fainted after he finished speaking. No one could hear him. Those were the last words he said to himself. Those were the last words he said to the world. I'm not wrong. How unreasonable. How self-righteous. How strong. The tea house was completely silent. only the thick smoke that was so thick that one couldn't even see one's fingers were rolling. It was very similar to the scene of demons and ghosts appearing in legends. Suddenly, a series of exclamations sounded. It was as if the soldiers outside had really seen some demons and ghosts. Then there was another loud bang. Then, a gust of wind blew into the tea house. The thick smoke was blown away in an instant, and the dazzling sunlight poured down, shining on the bodies of the people lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. The roof of the tea house was lifted. The entire interior of the tea house was exposed to the blue sky. The fire that was burning under the tea house was quietly extinguished at some point. Fresh air rushed in. Shadow's body moved slightly. Then a series of heart-wrenching coughs sounded. When the coughing stopped, Shadow struggled to raise his head. He used his blurry eyes to observe the situation around him. Then, he discovered that there was one more person in the tea house. That person stood there and strolled leisurely. His unbelievably clean clothes attracted people's attention. His red hair was as bright as flames. His golden eyes were glaring. Shadow looked at him, opened his mouth, and murmured, "End of chapter. I hope that before I die, the last thing I say is that I'm not wrong. I'm still alive. I don't know if anyone has thought about this." Chapter 220. Humans shouldn't regret or deny everything they've done. Even if it was wrong, humans could pay the price for their mistakes, but they couldn't regret it. No matter how much they regretted it, time wouldn't start over. Even if you were to tell others about your remorse with tears streaming down your face, they wouldn't be able to empathize with you. They would only secretly laugh with a heavy expression on their faces. Qi-Lin walked up to Yu-Ying and lifted him up by the collar with one hand before placing him on the ground. Ugh! Shadow's eyes popped out of their sockets the moment he was lifted up. He couldn't help but stick out his tongue. Shadow was almost strangled to death by Ji-Lin's actions. Luckily, Ji-Lin put him down quickly. "What are you doing here?" Ji-Lin looked around and frowned. "Didn't I ask you to gather information about the Elven Island? Why are you still playing here?" "Am I playing? What am I playing? Am I playing with my life?" Shadow was so angry that he couldn't even speak. The little bit of warmth in her heart when she saw Ji-Lin disappeared completely in an instant. "How's the information?" Ji-Lin asked with a serious expression. "Can't you ask me if I'm okay first? I almost died in the fire just now. There's no need to ask. You won't die." "You." Shadow was so angry that he wanted to curse. However, when he thought about how cruel Ji-Lin was, he didn't dare to. He changed the topic and asked, "Do you have water?" Ji-Lin frowned. "Have you seen me drink water? Why would I have that? Don't dragons drink water? Did you get any information?" "I'm thirsty." Crimson Unicorn stared at Hidden Shadow for a while until Hidden Shadow started to avoid his gaze. Ji-Lin thought that humans were really troublesome. However, he still thought about it, and a red fireball appeared in Ji-Lin's hand. Shadow didn't know what Ji-Lin wanted to do. However, he knew that although the fireball in Ji-Lin's hand didn't look big, it definitely had the power to destroy the heavens and earth. Compared to this small fireball, the fire and thick smoke that he had just experienced should be considered as a spring breeze brushing against his face. Without waiting for Shadow to say anything, Crimson Lin tossed the fireball casually. The fireball suddenly turned into a red meteor and fell into the sea not far away under Shadow's nervous gaze. Then, there was a deafening explosion. Shadow couldn't help but cover his ears. Then, there was another earthquake. Shadow looked at the other buildings that were swaying and collapsing. Only the half-ruined tea house under his feet was as stable as Mount Tai. The huge explosion created huge waves in the sea. It was unknown whether it was due to Qi-Lin's control or something else, but it did not form into a tsunami. Instead, it instantly turned into a sea of water. Countless water vapor rose into the sky and turned into clouds. The clouds grew bigger and darker. Finally, it was as black as ink and covered the sky. Thus, a heavy rain fell on Ruei-Yun City, like a downpour. Shadow looked up at the rain in a daze. His feelings were indescribable. He only asked Qi-Lin if there was any water, but Qi-Lin made it rain for him. "Can you tell me now?" Qi-Lin looked at Shadow. "What did you find out?" "A lot." This time, Shadow said straightforwardly. He finally understood. The branches that grew out of the scarlet unicorn were all towering trees. Tell me. First of all, the Elven Island is a mysterious island hidden in the endless vastness. Legend has it that it is the place where the elves live. Do I need you to tell me that? Didn't we already know about this a year ago? Tell me. Legend has it that only through a special method, or by being chosen by the Elven Queen, can land on the Elven Island. Only humans can be chosen. Anyway, that's what the legends say. Okay, go on. You can't interrupt anymore. Yes. Legend has it that there is a lake on the Elven Island. The surface of the lake is always like a mirror. No matter how strong the wind is, it can't cause a ripple. However, this lake is like a mirage. It often disappears. Legend has it that the Elven Island is filled with mist all year round. Anyone can get lost in it. Legend has it that the Elven Island hides a mountain of gold. All the wealth in the world can't compare to it. Legend has it that the Elven Island has a spring of life. Legend has it that the Elven Island has a sapling of the world tree. That's enough. Jilin listened for a long time and finally couldn't help but raise his hand to stop Shadow from talking nonstop. Why are you talking so much about legends? Did you come here to listen to stories? Can the legends of humans be trusted? Shadow didn't panic. He seemed to have expected this. He calmly said to Jilin, "Yes, these legends can't be trusted. However, these legends have one thing in common. They must be trustworthy." What do they have in common? It's here. Shadow pointed at his feet. Here? Jilin looked down. It's Rue Yun City. Shadow rolled his eyes. These legends are said to be spread by people who have been to the Elven Island, and all of them came out from here. Jilin frowned. So your goal is the Elven Island. Geraint had already woken up. He woke up when Jilin made that rain. Not only him, even the red-robed people on the ground had woken up because they were all experts that were much stronger than Yuing. This was a matter of course. However, these people tacitly stayed motionless. In other words, they pretended to be dead. They could all feel that Jilin's strength was too terrifying. Although they didn't see how Jilin opened the tea house, they could feel how Jilin made that rain. From the moment Jilin took out the fireball, these people suddenly realized how small they were. It was as if they were standing alone under a landslide or a tsunami. After that, they heard the conversation between Yu Ying and Qilin. Shadow really didn't notice it, and Jilin did, but he didn't care. Until Geraint spoke, the red-robed people still planned to stay motionless. You actually want to encroach on Rue Yun City for that illusory legend. Geraint was obviously panicking. This is? Jilin looked at Shadow. Shadow muttered to himself for a while and organized his words. It was never easy to introduce a human to Jilin. He is the boss of this place, Shadow nodded and said. He knows the way to the Elven Island? Jilin looked at Geraint again. He probably doesn't know, Shadow said. Trash. Jilin didn't bother to look at him again. The Elven Island is a legendary place. We don't know if it exists or not. Even if your Excellency's strength is extraordinary, you can't do anything about it, Geraint said. I advise your Excellency to give up your delusions and work for the Divine Dragon Empire. Your Excellency destroyed half of my Rue Yun City. I believe His Majesty the Hero King will let bygones be bygones. Why don't your Excellency turn over a new leaf? You're a little annoying. Jilin looked at Geraint and said indifferently. Chapter 221. If Jilin said that a human was annoying, then that human would soon lose the ability to speak. This was Shadow's thought. Shadow stood in front of Jilin, tugged at his sleeve, and said anxiously, "You can't kill this person. There's a use for him." He was afraid that if he spoke any slower, it would be too late. Geraint was already sweating profusely when Jilin glanced at him, but he was still unwilling to give up. He suppressed his fear and said, "Your Excellency, do you really want to ally with the Red Dragon sect and become enemies with the Divine Dragon Empire? Do you know that there are 2 Dragon Knights from the Divine Dragon Empire nearby? If you had, what is it?" Qilin suddenly turned his head and stared at Geraint. Shadow was stunned on the spot, as if he had been struck by lightning. Only now did he realize that he had still underestimated the Red Dragon sect. In the eyes of the Hero King, they were so hateful and irreconcilable. What was irreconcilable? It meant that in this world, there would be no one but me. The Hero King could actually send out 2 Dragon Knights during the high tide to kill them. From the looks of it, the Hero King's hatred for them ran deep. However, this was not the main point now. The main point was that Geraint had said the words Dragon Knights just now. Although Shadow knew this term, he had never dared to say it in front of Jilin. Impossible! Shadow suddenly shouted. In order to protect Geraint's life, he could only divert Jilin's attention like this. Although Jilin was powerful and had learned a lot from Staya, Staya's education methods made Jilin's thoughts simpler than most humans. Sure enough, Jilin turned his head and asked, "What are you doing?" Ewing ignored him. Instead, he continued, "That's impossible. As far as I know, the Divine Dragon Empire no longer has any extra wyverns to deal with the rising tide. How could they possibly send 2 of them to deal with us? How do you know how many dragons there are in the Empire?" Geraint asked in shock. Seeing that he was about to mention that word again, Ewing hurriedly interrupted him and said before he could, "Based on my Red Dragon Society's intelligence system and the descriptions of those who witnessed the flying dragon, it's not hard to guess. The Red Dragon sect is indeed a great threat to the Empire." Geraint looked at Shadow and said in a deep voice, "But why is it impossible?" "Because there aren't enough dragons. Originally, it wasn't enough, but this time, we have help." "Helper, there's no harm in telling you. It's the Middle Empire." Geraint looked at Jilin and said. He pointed out the friendly relationship between the 2 empires in hopes of intimidating Jilin and making him back off. However, what he didn't know was that the reason why the empires that had always been fighting and killing each other suddenly became united and friendly and helped each other was because of him. Middle Empire? Ewing glanced at Jilin. That's right. A new emperor of the Middle Empire ascended the throne a year ago. The new emperor is indeed a wise ruler. I don't know what method he used to convince His Majesty, the Hero King, to allow the golden spaceship of the Middle Empire to fly over the Divine Dragon Empire. Ewing blinked in a daze, feeling that this was how the world played tricks on people. At this moment, the sound of huge creatures flapping their wings rang out. Geraint and Ewing couldn't help but look up. The red-robed people were still firmly motionless. 2 silhouettes were rapidly approaching from the sky. They were the flying dragons of the Divine Dragon Empire. The dragons' erect horns were exceptionally fierce. Every one of their sharp scales shone under the sunlight. Their huge wings were thick and powerful. Every flap was like a gust of wind. They were beautiful and strong creatures. A hint of joy appeared on Geraint's face, but then it froze on his face. His eyes shrunk to the size of a needle tip. This was because there weren't any so-called knights on the backs of the 2 flying dragons. Instead, the things in the mouths of the 2 flying dragons were a little similar. Geraint didn't want to think about what happened next. However, what was difficult for Geraint to accept was obvious to Ewing. It was nothing more than Jilin encountering these 2 dragon knights on the way here. Of course, Jilin didn't like them, so he let the flying dragons kill the dragon knights. He didn't even have to do it himself. Impossible. Geraint's lips trembled. He tried several times before shouting this sentence. Why is it impossible? Jilin looked at him and said playfully, "How can the flying dragons hurt the knights?" Geraint obviously couldn't accept it. They have gone through life and death together. They are the closest comrade-in-arms and companions. Jilin sneered. He took a step forward, lifted Geraint up, and pressed him against the wall. He looked at him and said coldly, "Comrade-in-arms and companions? Don't joke around, human. Would you ride your comrade-in-arms and companions everywhere? Humans will only treat other life forms as food, tools, and pets. If you really treated them as companions, why would you set a restriction in their bloodline? The flying dragons are too powerful. If they aren't controlled, did I allow you to speak?" Jilin's voice was full of anger. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt. Once it erupted, it would destroy the world. Shadow saw that Jilin was already gritting his teeth and talking, so he wisely stopped interrupting. Geraint was dead. Jilin's hand rose with flames, and Geraint was instantly burned to ashes. He was burned to the point that even his ashes were gone, except for a black figure left on the wall of the tea house. It was clean, as if this person had never existed in the world. Shadow picked up the City Lord token that fell on the ground. He was glad that this thing didn't turn into nothingness with Geraint. Why are you still holding it? Throw it away. Jilin waved his hand and didn't look back. The two flying dragons had already landed on the broken wall of the tea house. When they heard Jilin's words, they turned their heads and casually threw the body in their mouths down. It was as casual as humans throwing away garbage. Jilin asked them to kill the humans, so they killed them. They were indeed a little tired after holding it for so long. And as Jilin said, human meat didn't taste good. Jilin had already walked to the side of the tea house. He stood on the wall and looked at the sea. The golden light in his eyes was like two scorching suns. The golden light was so dazzling that Shadow couldn't open his eyes. He could only use his hands to block it. He hadn't seen Jilin's eyes so bright for a long time. Now, Jilin stood there and gazed at the seaside with glowing eyes, as if he was a human-shaped lighthouse. Shadow thought in his heart. "What are you looking at?" Shadow asked. "Looking at the road," Jilin said lightly. "Looking at the road." Shadow's voice went up an octave. He was very surprised. He thought to himself, "Brother, when did you look at the road? Are you walking? What road are you looking at?" Shadow asked. "The road to the Elf Island," Jilin said. Shadow stopped breathing and looked at Jilin. His eyes suddenly widened, and he asked in a trembling voice, "Did you see it?" "I saw it." Chapter 222. "You saw it?" Ewing exclaimed. His voice was filled with disbelief. The Elven Island was extremely mysterious and originally only existed in human legends. In order to find the Elven Island, Hidden Shadow had already prepared for a long battle. That was why he decided to take over Rueyun City, so that it would be convenient for him to investigate the Elven Island in the future. But he didn't expect that the matter that he put in so much effort and risked his life to not even find a clue would be easily solved by Jilin's arrival. No one could easily accept something like this, because it would make him seem too stupid and insignificant. "It was you who found this place." Jilin looked at Hidden Shadow and said seriously, "Otherwise, the sea would be too big, and this path would be too faint. I wouldn't be able to find it." Hearing Jilin's rare consolation, Hidden Shadow felt a little better. He looked at Jilin and said, "Then what do we do now? Let's go explore." After saying that, Jilin revealed his true body in a ball of flames, grabbed Hidden Shadow, and flapped his wings, instantly disappearing. Only a red line could be seen flying in the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The tea house was already badly burned by the flames, and then half of it was destroyed by Jilin. The internal structure was already unstable. Now, it finally couldn't withstand the power of Jilin's wings and collapsed under Jilin's wind, turning into ruins. Debris flew everywhere. The red-robed people could no longer pretend to be dead. They all got up and rushed out of the collapsed tea house. Looking at the empty street, they looked at each other. On the vast and boundless sea, there was a vast expanse of mist, and the sky was also an extremely clean, deep blue. Hidden Shadow looked at the horizon, but he couldn't see the boundary between the sea and the sky. It was as if the entire world had turned blue, and only the clouds were white. Jilin's body was the size of a small mountain, freely flying in the sky. Sometimes forward, sometimes left, sometimes flying in circles. It seemed like he was flying casually out of boredom. "Have you finished forging your divine artifact?" Hidden Shadow was the first to break the dead silence. "Not yet, but soon." "Then why are you here?" "To see you." "What's so nice about me?" "Let's see your progress." "Are you in a hurry?" "Yes." "Staya is dying?" "Yes." Once again, Shadow and Jilin fell into silence. When Staya first saw that Jilin was extremely weak and only had one clone in this world, she thought that was a great opportunity to eliminate Jilin for all of humanity. Therefore, he brazenly attacked, truly risking his life. She used her identity as the Saintess of the Light to force the god to descend, and then sacrificed herself. Her body was already in tatters. Saying that he still had a breath left was an understatement. The fact that he was still alive was all thanks to the protective ability of the holy grimoire of light and Jilin's careful care. But in the end, he was only treating the symptoms and not the root cause. Now that things had come to this, was he finally unable to hold on any longer? No wonder Jilin was so anxious. Ewing thought, "Why are you always beating around the bush?" Ewing pondered for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask. Jilin had already flown around the small island 3 times in such a short period of time. Now it seemed like he would have to fly around 3 more times anyway. This is how the road is, Jilin said. Road? Hearing this, Ewing raised his eyebrows and looked down through the gaps between Jilin's fingers. The blue sea was vast and boundless. There was no road. Besides, there was no road that required you to go around the same place 3 times. The Elven Island is an arcane realm, Jilin said. Arcane realm. Yes, for humans, it should be a different world that doesn't exist in this world. For a place like this, if you want to go, you must take a specific route and use a specific method. Where's the route? There's a green road in the sea. Hidden in the sea, very thin and faint. Why can't I see it? You can't see it. Shadow was speechless. He angrily retracted his futile gaze. He wanted to ignore Jilin, but after thinking for a while, he felt that it was inappropriate. So he asked, Jilin, why are you looking for the Elven Island? Jilin turned his head and glanced at him. The intense golden light caused Jilin's shadow to shrink. To save Staya, of course, Jilin said. That's right, we're going to ask for help. Ewing said, do you know that in the human world, no matter how strong a man is, he won't disrespect a doctor? I don't know about that, Jilin said straightforwardly. Anyway, you have to remember, we can't fight with the people from the Elven Island. Ewing said, otherwise, even if you sink the Elven Island, you won't be able to save Staya. Jilin was silent for a long time. Then he said one word. Yes. Phew. Ewing let out a long sigh of relief. The Elven Island that had been praised by humans for thousands of years, if it disappeared in front of his eyes, or if it was burned down by fire, wouldn't be good. Why did you stop? Ewing suddenly noticed that the clouds in the sky were no longer moving, so he knew that Jilin had stopped. He couldn't help but ask curiously. He thought to himself, did the path tell you to wait here? Of course, that was impossible. Although there were all kinds of paths in this world, and some of them might even make you walk in a big circle, they wouldn't make you wait. That was because the so-called path was something that made people move forward, no matter if it was a human or a dragon. If he suddenly stopped walking, there were only 2 possibilities. Either he was tired, or he had arrived. That was a very simple thing. But Ewing didn't understand, because Jilin couldn't be tired so quickly, and the Elven Island was very far away in his heart. How could he arrive so quickly? We're here. Ewing didn't say anything. He stood up, held Jilin's hand, and looked down. Sure enough, a lush island with dense forests appeared before his eyes. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air. When Ewing looked in this direction just now, he didn't see this island. What do we do now? Do we go in directly? Jilin asked. It was rare for Jilin to ask for his opinion, but Ewing didn't say anything after thinking for a long time. It was definitely not in line with etiquette to go to the island rashly. But if he wanted to knock on the door and ask for directions, where was the door? Fortunately, this situation didn't last long because the owner of the island came out. The Elven Queen, who was wearing a long white dress and a light veil, quietly appeared on the crown of a giant tree. Then, the giant tree began to grow crazily, until the Elven Queen's line of sight was level with Jilin's. Ewing looked at the legendary elves and thought that they were just like the legends. Apart from their slightly longer ears, they didn't look any different from humans. No, it wasn't that they didn't. The elves were much better looking than humans, especially the Elven Queen. That flawless face was simply God's most beautiful and perfect creation. What was rare was that the Elven Queen exuded a graceful and noble aura that made people not dare to look at her directly. That was the unique aura of a truly noble person. This aura was similar to the third prince's, but it was much more obvious than the third prince's. Ewing looked at the Elven Queen in a daze. The more he looked, the more uncomfortable he felt. He felt as if he couldn't breathe. Shadow hurriedly turned his head and gasped for air. He even forgot to breathe just now. Ewing clutched his chest and thought that there really was such a thing as a beauty that could captivate fish and beasts. The fish forgot to flap its fins because the woman was too beautiful and sank into the water. The wild goose forgot to flap its wings because of the woman's stunning appearance and fell down. As for whether it died or not, no one knew. And Ewing actually forgot to breathe when he looked at the Elven Queen. Can you ever get rid of your bad habit of loving everyone you see? Finally, even Jilin felt a little embarrassed and couldn't help but ask, "A real dragon?" The Elven Queen looked at Jilin. "What are you doing on the Elven Island? Elves and dragons are never on the same side." "Oh." Jilin looked at the Elven Queen. Even he couldn't help but be amazed by the Elven Queen's beauty. "I heard that there's a spring of life on the Elven Island. I have someone who is injured and I want to borrow it." Ridiculous. A dragon actually wants to borrow something from an elf. The Elven Queen shook her head. "I advise you to leave quickly. This is not a place where you should be. There's no place that a dragon shouldn't go in the 3,000 worlds." Jilin spat out a bunch of flames from his mouth. This meant that he was angry. It was the first time he saw someone who spoke like this after seeing his real body. A dragon is still so arrogant. "Are you insulting a dragon?" Jilin's voice was like thunder. "Insulting? Ha! In the mythological era, I've killed 2 dragons like you." Jilin had never heard such words. He was so angry that he couldn't control himself. What etiquette? What asking for help? Everything was forgotten. Dragon's breath. Jilin spat out dragon's breath and shot it toward the Elven Queen. Ewing was shocked. He didn't expect Jilin to use his trump card right off the bat. One could imagine that he was going crazy with anger. But in this way, the Elven Queen had no chance of survival. However, to Jilin and Yu Ying's surprise, the Elven Queen's expression didn't change at all. She raised her arm calmly. She said softly, "Mirror of the sky." A lake suddenly rose from the forest on the Elven Island. No, more accurately, it was the lake's surface. There wasn't a single ripple on the lake's surface. It was as flat as a mirror, as if it had traveled through time and space. The lake's surface blocked the Elven Queen before the dragon's breath. The dragon's breath disappeared quietly as if it had never appeared. Jilin looked at the Elven Queen. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was facing a great enemy. Chapter 223. Legend had it that there was a lake on the Elven Island. The surface of the lake was as flat as a mirror all year round. No matter how strong the wind was, there would not be a single ripple on it. Hidden Shadow looked at the surface of the lake and suddenly remembered this legend. So there really was such a lake. It turned out that it was a huge mirror. Before Hidden Shadow could react, a shadow covered his head. Hidden Shadow was shrouded in darkness. It was Jilin who had set up his wings in front of him. Hidden Shadow could see that the scales on Jilin's wings had all closed up. It became incomparably tight, without a single gap. The wings turned into 2 huge shields. Then there was a violent impact. Hidden Shadow saw that Jilin's wings were actually trembling nonstop. After a long time, Jilin suddenly opened his wings, and Hidden Shadow saw the light of day again. "What is this?" Jilin looked at the Elven Queen and asked in a deep voice, "It can actually repel my dragon breath." "This is called the Mirror of the Sky," the Elven Queen said. "This is a gift from the god of space to us elves." As the Elven Queen spoke, the Mirror of the Sky began to shrink rapidly, until the lake with a diameter of a few thousand meters turned into a piece of ice the size of a human eye. It flew into the Elven Queen's left eye. "Now, your dragon breath is completely useless." The Elven Queen looked completely confident and fearless. "All magical attacks that are seen by my left, I will be repelled." This was the confidence of the strongest creature in the world. Of course, Jilin did not believe it and casually threw a fireball at her. The fireball flew in front of the Elven Queen and suddenly disappeared. However, in the next moment, it suddenly appeared and flew back toward Jilin. Sure enough, this kind of attack is useless. Jilin thought to himself. After that, Without any warning, the fireball disappeared with a puff sound. Even if it was repelled, it was still a fireball after all. A golden light flashed in Jilin's eyes. He instantly appeared in front of the Elven Queen and raised a finger. He stabbed out with a finger. His sharp fingernails shone with a soul-stirring, cold light. It was as if it was the coldest and sharpest sword in the world. Since magic did not work, then close combat. This was a very simple principle. Jilin's finger was as fast as lightning. Ever since he followed Aisha into the world, he had never missed. No one was able to react in time before this finger. But the Elven Queen was not an ordinary person. If the trajectory of Crimson Lin's finger could be barely detected by shadow, then the Elven Queen's movements could not be detected by shadow at all. Hidden Shadow even thought that the Elven Queen. Her arms were originally hanging by her side, but she suddenly raised them horizontally and pulled the light veil draped over her back to block in front of her body. It was extremely abrupt, as if the important process of raising the arm had been omitted. But if that wasn't the case, he wouldn't have been able to block Jilin's finger. Yes, it was blocked. The Elven Queen's aunt's Elven Queen. If those humans who were stabbed to death by Jilin were to see such an unreasonable scene, they would surely die with grievances. Jilin looked at it. There was a faint mist flowing on the surface, but there were no threads. That's not a veil. It's a fog. Jilin remembered what Hidden Shadow had said to him. Legend had it that there was a thick fog on the Elven Island that did not dissipate all year round. Anyone who walked into it would get lost. Jilin saw that the Elven Island was lush and green. It was so green that it was intoxicating. There was no fog at all. He thought that it was an unreliable human legend, but it turned out that the Elven Queen had covered herself with the fog. Jilin did not believe it. He stabbed another 100 times in an instant. The hurricane formed, made the sea turbulent. Huge waves shook the sky. The Elven Queen just looked at Jilin and let Jilin attack. I'll stand still and let the wind come from all directions. Jilin was so angry that he punched with all his strength. A powerful aura filled the world, and the wind and the sea moved with it. An even bigger red dragon shadow appeared behind Jilin. Then he punched. That was himself. The wind and the clouds changed, overturning the sea. This power that could destroy the world was like a clay ox entering the sea when it came into contact with that thin layer of fog. It disappeared. Jilin felt like he was punching the air. Is this also a divine artifact? Jilin asked. The water god's gift is called flowing mist. The Elven Queen smiled. Unless you can hit the fog. Otherwise, don't waste your energy. Ewing was completely dumbfounded. He originally thought that Jilin was already unreasonable enough. He did not expect the Elven Queen to be even more unreasonable than Jilin. The mirror sky could counter all magical attacks. Flowing mist could block all close-range attacks. How could he fight? This was an innate, invincible position. Was she still giving him a way out? Jilin, if you can't do it, then retreat. Think about it. Hidden Shadow said anxiously. However, Jilin ignored him. He looked at the Elven Queen and said, I can't hit you, and you can't beat me either. Naive dragon. The Elven Queen shook her head and laughed. Then she raised her hands, and 2 rays of light suddenly lit up on the Elven Island. They rose from the Elven Island and fell into the Elven Queen's hands. It was a bow made entirely of tree branches. It emitted an extremely majestic aura. Jilin glanced at Hidden Shadow. Previously, he said that there was a sapling of the world tree on the Elven Island. As for what the golden arrow was, he could not tell for now. The Elven Queen knocked the bow and pulled the arrow, and the power of the world was ready. It was the power of an entire small world. The universe array of the Middle Empire was just like this when it suppressed Jilin. Bang! A loud sound was heard. A golden arc of light flashed across the sky, and the Megalosaurus fell into the sea. Splash! However, in just a few seconds, Jilin broke out of the sea again. He floated in the sky and stared at the Elven Queen. His right arm had been pierced. Dragon blood that was countless times redder than human blood was slowly dripping down Jilin's arm. The red blood dripped onto the sea and the seawater began to burn. The area below Jilin gradually turned into a sea of fire. The fire soared to the sky. Hidden Shadow hugged Jilin's finger and coughed out a few mouthfuls of saliva. He looked at Jilin with tears streaming down his face. "Why don't we stop fighting?" "No, it's the Dragon Clan's rule. All dragons that shed blood must pay with their lives." "Brother, it's too difficult for you to kill him now. You can't beat him." "You can't beat him." Only a few hours ago, Ewing would never have dreamed that he would actually be able to shout out these words to Jilin. "It's okay." Jilin did not deny it. "I still have a move." Jilin spread his wings, and the domain that belonged to him began to spread rapidly. The domain that originally only covered 5 meters in front of him gradually expanded to thousands of meters. Jilin believed that as long as his domain could encompass the Elven Queen, the final victor would still be himself. Dragon language magic into fire. It was the essence of all fire. It could burn all elements in the domain into fire elements. Everything would be burned into nothingness, including the Elven Queen and her divine weapons. The Elven Queen's eyes focused, and her golden-green eyes became incomparably deep. The Elven Queen's domain quietly spread out. Rumble. There was nothing between Jilin and the Elven Queen. However, there were endless roars. Sometimes there were flames burning out of thin air. Sometimes there was a flash of lightning. The air froze, and the hurricane was like a knife. That was the aftermath of the two domains crushing each other and colliding. The world was divided into two halves. One was as violent as a raging fire, and all things were destroyed. The other was as warm as the spring breeze, full of vitality. Jilin let out a long roar, and the Megalosaurus illusion that filled the world appeared again. Jilin had begun to borrow the power of the world. The Elven Queen's domain began to be forced back. Oomph. The Elven Queen snorted coldly, and then the entire Elven island lit up. It turned into a myriad of colors. The light soared into the sky. Countless rays of light fell on the Elven Queen. Every ray of light was a divine weapon. The light faded. The Elven Queen revealed herself. Even Jilin was stunned. The Elven Queen, who was originally as otherworldly and unapproachable as an immortal, had suddenly become tacky. Her hands were full of 10 rings. A crown appeared on her head, and it was inlaid with all kinds of gemstones. There were no less than 3 or 4 head ornaments, and there were countless accessories on her body: jade pendants, brooches, necklaces, bracelets, earrings. The Elven Queen, who was equipped with all the divine weapons, was really speechless. Even the tackiest rich human woman would not dress up like this. It was too messy, but it was very strong. A shadow also began to appear behind the Elven Queen. Not just one. The shadow behind Jilin was himself. What appeared behind the Elven Queen was the god of light, the god of space, the god of life, the goddess of earth, the god of sun, the god of fire, the god of water. Jilin glanced at the group of shadows. He did not need the shadow to say anything. He turned around and flew away. In human terms, this was he fled in panic. Chapter 224. Jilin turned around and flew away. He did not even look back. Soon, it turned into a small red dot on the horizon and disappeared. The Elven Queen looked in the direction Jilin left. She did not chase after him. Instead, she just watched quietly. After a long while, the giant tree under the Elven Queen's feet began to shrink. Soon, it returned to its original state. The Elven Queen also landed on the ground. Under the tree, the elves were already standing. They looked at the Elven Queen with concern. How long had it been since the Elven Queen fought with someone? How long had it been since she was equipped with these artifacts? Was it 1,000 years? Or 2,000 years? They did not expect such a powerful creature to exist in this world. Naturally, the elves broke out in cold sweat. Fortunately, their queen won in the end. As usual, the Elven Queen slowly floated down from the giant tree toward the angel. It was like a dream. The artifacts on her were long gone. The elven queen changed back in her white dress. She looked noble and elegant. She looked magnificent. It was as if any accessories were superfluous to her. "Queen, your majesty." The elves crowded around her with concern in their eyes. "I'm fine." The elven queen smiled and shook her head. Her smile was like the spring rain washing away the morning sun. In an instant, the world lost its color. "Your majesty, how did that dragon come to the elven island? Could it be that our ancient restriction has lost its effect?" An elf asked. The elven queen shook her head slightly. "No, this is the dragon's talent. Legend has it that the ancestor of the dragon clan, the Black Dragon King, could travel from hell to the human world and bring endless black smoke to the world. He has more or less inherited some of his bloodline. Even if this red dragon is not as powerful as the Black Dragon King, it should have no problem passing through the boundary of our small world. Unfortunately, even the queen could not kill him on the spot." A female elf sighed regretfully. "Nonsense. The queen is kind-hearted and does not want to kill. That's why she shot his arm." "I see." The elven queen looked at her people and did not explain. Only she knew that she had aimed at the dragon's head when she shot that arrow, the bough of the world tree paired with the meteor arrow. It was her most powerful attack. Even if she attacked the enemy through one or two small worlds, she could kill the enemy in an instant. One could only imagine how fast that arrow was. But at such a close distance, at such a fast speed, the Crimson Dragon dodged. This meant that he had clearly seen the trajectory of the meteor arrow. In the elven queen's knowledge, if one wanted to see the trajectory of the meteor arrow clearly, even if it was a dragon with excellent eyesight, only the Golden Dragon tribe could do it. The Golden Dragon clan's golden eyes were said to be able to see the movement of light. But if he was from the Golden Dragon tribe, why would he be red? The elven queen looked at the sea not far away. A raging fire was still burning on the surface of the sea. The fire was so strong that it seemed to burn the sky. It was Jilin's blood. The bloodlines of the Golden Dragon tribe and the Fire Dragon tribe were both so pure and supreme. This dragon was somewhat unusual. Previously, the God of Light had said that the hero was about to arrive at the Elven Island. The God of Light had also said that the hero would obtain supreme power on the Elven Island and suppress the demonic dragon. But now, the demon dragon had arrived before the hero. But from the looks of it, even if the hero had 2 more holy swords and twice as much supreme power, he still wouldn't be a match for the demon dragon. Thinking of this, the Elven Queen smiled again. Interesting. Divine Dragon Empire. In a coastal city in the east. Inside an unknown small restaurant. The furnishings in the restaurant were decorated in an ancient style. The primary colored wooden tables and chairs had long been polished by customers coming and going. It looked like an old restaurant with a flourishing business. The red-haired, golden-eyed Jilin, who had already transformed into a human, was sitting at a table with his arms crossed. He was deep in thought with his head lowered. Ying was sitting directly opposite Jilin. This was the first time he had seen Jilin so deep and serious. He didn't know what Jilin was thinking. Therefore, he didn't dare to say anything. He even spent a lot of effort to suppress the words, "You deserve it." As an old restaurant, the waiter quickly served the dishes that Ying ordered. After the dishes were placed properly, the waiter bowed slightly and asked softly, "Sir, your dishes are all here. Would you like to order anything else?" Ying politely said, "No need." The waiter bowed again and didn't say anything else. Then, he went to serve the other customers. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be anyone who would ask someone if they wanted to order something right after the dishes were served. No matter what, they should wait for someone to eat first. According to the words of the Middle Empire, this was called after 3 rounds of wine, 5 flavors of food. However, Ying didn't care about the waiter's question. It wasn't because Ying had seen too many storms. Instead, it was because the dishes he ordered were worthy of being asked. Garlic lettuce, stir-fried cabbage, sesame paste cucumber. The only meat on the table was probably the plate of dry-fried small fish that the restaurant gave as a gift. The small fish, which were less than 2 knuckles long, were fried golden yellow. Their heads, intestines, fins, and gills were not removed. In the Divine Dragon Empire, as long as you knew a fisherman, you wouldn't need to spend money to eat this. Ewing stole a glance at Jilin. Jilin still had his head lowered and didn't say anything. He didn't react at all. Ewing was about to break out in a cold sweat. Among all the aspects of humans, what Jilin appreciated the most was humans' culinary skills. Although Jilin always said that it was the embodiment of humans' cruel nature and that it was a meaningless technique for humans to dispose of the corpses of other creatures. However, every time they went to eat roasted whole lamb, Jilin could still eat 5 to 6 roasted lambs alone. This was the result of Yu-ing and Staya stopping him. However, now that Yu-ing ordered a table of vegetarian dishes, Jilin didn't react at all. He even subconsciously picked up his chopsticks, picked up a piece of cabbage, and put it into his mouth. Then, he started chewing. Ewing widened his eyes and looked at Jilin in shock. Oh no, damn it, a dragon eating vegetables. Bah! Jilin chewed 4 to 5 times. Suddenly, he tilted his head and spat on the ground. Jilin finally raised his head and glanced at Ewing. There was actually a hint of resentment in his eyes. Ewing's hair stood on end, and he shivered a few times. What is this? Jilin asked. Cabbage. What's cabbage? To humans, it's a dish. To you, it's a type of grass? Jilin didn't say anything about being a vegetarian for the first time in his life. He probably didn't care. He had been invincible since he was born. He had never been a match for him in the continent. However, he was defeated today. Ewing felt that he might not be able to understand this feeling even if he lived his whole life. So, he didn't hesitate to say what he wanted to say. How can the Elf Queen be so strong? Ewing said, I thought she was at most on the same level as Sing. One is the king of the orcs, and the other is the king of the elves. It sounds similar, but why is the difference so big? Jilin glanced at him and didn't say anything. He thought the same. However, there was one problem that they were both wrong about. The Elf Queen wasn't the king of the elves. She was the god of the elves. What should we do? Staya can't hold on for long. You can't beat her. Do you have a way to defeat her? Ewing said, but I say, what kind of grudge do you have with the Elf Queen? Why did they start fighting before I even finish my sentence? She doesn't look like such a violent person. Who said I can't beat her? Jilin blinked and looked at Ewing. Then this time, I'll go by myself next time. I won't bring you. What's the difference? Didn't I let her use one of my hands this time? Ewing was stunned for a moment. He wanted to refute, but he suddenly realized that what Jilin said made sense. This time, Jilin's battle with the Elf Queen was indeed holding him back the entire time. Speaking of which, he did let the Elf Queen use one of his hands. But why did he feel that something was wrong? Chapter 2:25. Shadow said that Jilin couldn't defeat the Elven Queen, and Jilin said that he was holding back one hand because of him. Shadow pondered for a long time before he finally understood. Holding back one hand? Even if you add another hand, you still can't defeat her. When you were fighting with the Elven Queen, I didn't see you use your arm. What's wrong? You're the second in the world, yet you can't defeat the first in the world. Are you trying to blame me? Shadow looked at Jilin with a smile, but he didn't dare to reveal his thoughts now that Jilin had just experienced his first defeat. Anyone could tell that he was in a bad mood. I don't know if you've noticed anything strange, Shadow said after a long silence. What's strange? Jilin asked. The Elven Queen's feet never left that tree. Shadow looked at Jilin and said, So what? Jilin said, The Elven Queen's strength is extremely terrifying. She is said to be omnipotent in all kinds of human legends. She has the absolute upper hand when fighting with you. Do you think such a creature can't fly? Shadow said. Jilin just looked at Shadow quietly and didn't say anything because there was no need for him to say anything. The Elven Queen had the protection of the Wind God, so it was impossible that she couldn't fly. Shadow saw the golden light in Jilin's eyes and knew that he had understood something. Then he said, If the Elven Queen can fly, then why did she bother to raise such a tall tree? Why did she just watch you fly away without chasing after you? After all, she looked like she hated you the moment she saw you. This doesn't make sense. There's only one possibility. She can't leave the Elven Island. Can't leave the Elven Island, Jilin repeated silently. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Shadow felt a chill run down his spine again. He could even guess what Jilin was thinking. It was nothing more than a harassment tactic. He would release a dragon's breath from afar, then turn around and run away. The Elven Queen would definitely panic. This way, it would only take a few days for Jilin to bring down the entire Elf Island. The Elven Queen could not take the initiative to attack and could only passively take a beating. He was already in an invincible position, but that wouldn't do. Staya can't hold on. Shadow pointed at the critical point and disrupted Jilin's tactical plan. Even if you can exhaust the Elven Queen to death, it will take at least 10 years. By then, Staya will be long dead. Then what should we do? Jilin's voice sounded a little angry. This was unacceptable, and that was unacceptable. When had the Dragon Clan ever suffered such humiliation? No problem. You have to let the Elven Queen know that she can't do anything to you. And then send me to the Elven Island. I'll go negotiate with her. You? Yes, she won't be wary of me. If you're in danger, I can't save you. For the princess. Shadow imitated the action of a knight in the illustration of the Holy Grimoire of Light. He beat his chest with his right hand and said this seriously. The Holy Grimoire of Light here was not the divine weapon in Staya's hands. It was printed by the Church of Light themselves and the missionary tools that were distributed all over the streets. There were words and pictures, vivid and easy to understand. You've changed a lot in this year. Jilin looked at Shadow, who was giving him advice, and could not help but sigh. Are you surprised? Shadow was a little proud. No, because being fickle and changeable is the nature of humans, Jilin said. If possible, I hope you can say that you've grown. Enough. Jilin stood up after he finished speaking. Let's go. Shadow blinked and could not follow Jilin's train of thought. Where are we going? To get back at her. Ewing slapped his forehead and sighed. He had seen Jilin learn the phrase, get back at her from the third prince. It doesn't matter. Come with me to deal with something first, Shadow said. You still have something to do? Jilin asked. Of course. Shadow rolled his eyes. Someone nearly burned me to death earlier. As soon as Ewing finished speaking, he broke out in a cold sweat from the shock. He thought to himself, why did I talk to Jilin like that? Fortunately, Jilin did not mind. Or rather, he was too distracted to notice. Are you going to take revenge? Jilin asked. No, I'm going to see some things clearly. In the Red Dragon Church's secret camp, Lacey was standing on the grass, looking at the beautiful amber sunset in the sky. The Red Dragon Church occupied Auspicious Cloud City and used it as a starting point to plot against the entire Divine Dragon Empire. Since most of Auspicious Cloud City was destroyed, he did not know if it was a success. Fortunately, the red-robed men he had sent out earlier had all returned safely. However, one person was missing. Shadow. Lacey thought of this young man he had recruited into the church more than a year ago and could not help but sigh. When this young man first came, he was ordinary. However, after that incident, he revealed extraordinary knowledge, temperament, and means. In less than a year, he had entered the decision-making level of the Red Dragon Church and gained the recognition of the higher-ups. He took things for granted that ordinary people did not even dare to think about, just like the plan to kill the Dragon Knights this time. Just as Lacey was thinking, a voice came from behind him. Lacey's body stiffened, and he slowly turned his head, only to see two people appearing and disappearing mysteriously behind him. He didn't know when they had quietly stood behind him. Lacey's heart tightened. He called out softly, Shadow. Then, Lacey saw Jilin standing beside Shadow. Red hair and golden eyes. Jilin didn't try to hide his appearance at all. That was how obvious his characteristics were. So much so that Reese recognized him immediately. Lacey's breathing quickened, and his pupils shrank to the size of needles. Seeing Lacey's violent reaction, Shadow finally confirmed his suspicions. It's really you. Shadow gritted his teeth and said hatefully, What's me? Lacey looked at Shadow with an innocent and confused expression. Stop pretending. You're a spy from the Divine Dragon Empire. Lacey's eyes narrowed. He looked around. There was no one around. Lacey took a deep breath and looked at Shadow. Why do you say that? Don't accuse a good person. Only these few people knew about this plan in advance. You were the only one who was not in the fire. Just based on this? Weren't you the one who arranged for me to be outside? Why can't it be that someone accidentally leaked the news? The red-robed men won't, Shadow said with absolute certainty. Also, you revealed the biggest flaw just now. What flaw? Ewing pointed at Chi Lin and said, in front of us, you've always been expressionless, as if you're indifferent to the world. However, when you saw him just now, you looked like you were struck by lightning. This means that you know him. You know what he is. Lacey looked at Shadow and didn't say anything. Even if Shadow didn't say it, he knew how shocked he was just now. His appearance is still a top secret among the upper echelons of the Empire. If you're not a spy from the Empire, how would you know? Shadow was still aggressive. Also, if you're really from the Red Dragon sect, why would you react like this when you saw him? How'd I react just now? Shock, fear, disbelief. Then how should I react? Kneel, worship, and cry. Lacey blinked and was silent for a while. He looked at Shadow and then looked at Jilin. Finally, he smiled. He cupped his hands and bowed to Ewing. It was the standard etiquette of the Middle Empire. He said softly, I've learned something. Hearing Lacey's words, Shadow sighed and closed his eyes. He didn't open them for a long time. The expression on his face was like a storm. His mood was constantly changing. It was as if he couldn't accept this fact. Lacey's words meant that he admitted it. Chapter 226. Humans were always like this. No matter how good the evidence was, they would not easily believe the people or things around them. Instead, they would wait for the other party to admit it personally before the dust would settle. It was as if they were afraid that they had wronged a good person. Of course, detectives and judicial personnel were an exception. To a certain extent, Reese was a judicial personnel, the Divine Dragon Empire's judicial personnel. Why? After a few breaths, Dark Shadow finally opened his eyes and asked with a complicated expression. Dark Shadow had known Reese for more than a year. Reese was the person who led Dark Shadow into the Divine Dragon Empire. For some reason, although they were not sworn friends, they could barely be considered friends. It was really just barely. Hence, Dark Shadow only had a complicated expression. Although Dark Shadow felt terrible about Reese's betrayal, he could still accept it. What do you mean, why? Reese tilted his head, wondering why Dark Shadow would ask such a strange question. As a spy of the Divine Dragon Empire, this is my mission. I mean, why did you recruit me back then? Dark Shadow asked with a gloomy expression. Oh, you're asking about this. Reese came to a realization. The Red Dragon sect has countless spies in the Empire. They infiltrate the Empire's intelligence system like a sieve. However, it is very difficult for the Empire's spies to infiltrate the Red Dragon sect. I am isolated and helpless in the Red Dragon sect, so I want to find some helpers. Rather than taking the risk to recruit the Red Dragon sect members, I might as well find my own people to help me. How can it be difficult for the Empire's people to infiltrate the Red Dragon sect? Dark Shadow asked. The Red Dragon sect is an underground organization. After all, they need to hide themselves, so they're very strict with their new members. People with unknown backgrounds are not allowed to come into contact with the core area. However, the Empire does not, Reese said. Moreover, it is easier to hide yourself than to stand out. Although Reese's words were not very clear, Dark Shadow still understood. The Red Dragon sect members infiltrating the Empire were just making up the numbers, but the Empire's people coming to the Red Dragon sect were standing out? Are you saying that the Empire's people are of higher quality than the Red Dragon sect's people? Dark Shadow asked with raised brows. Although that's not what I meant, you're not wrong to understand it that way. Lacey shrugged. The spies of the Empire have all received special training from the Empire. They are all top talents. They are a bit conspicuous in the Red Dragon sect, which is mostly uneducated. Shadow narrowed his eyes and decided not to argue with Lacey about this. So, the helper you're looking for is me? That's right. Back then, I could tell that you weren't from the Divine Dragon Empire. Although I don't know much about him, I don't think he has anything to do with the Red Dragon sect. That's why I chose you, Lacey said. Just this? Of course not. At that time, you didn't know the villagers, but you helped them. It shows that you are a good person with a chivalrous heart. Furthermore, You were able to plan before taking action. You were able to observe the entire situation and then seize the opportunity to kill the leading soldier. Even among spies, this kind of temperament and methods would be considered top-notch. Your aptitude is not bad. Shadow nodded, agreeing with Lei Sei's words. Since you wanted me to join the Red Dragon sect, because of this, why didn't you mention it to me? That's because not long after you joined the Red Dragon sect, I discovered something very strange about you. It was these things that made me give up on this idea. What's strange about me? Shadow frowned. That is, you have an unreasonably firm belief in that so-called Red Dragon god. What? Shadow's eyes widened in disbelief. Yes, you might not have realized it, but your belief in the Red Dragon god is outstanding even in the Red Dragon sect. Although you have an unwilling expression every time you kneel before the Red Dragon god's portrait, you are the only one who truly believes that the Red Dragon god exists. When others kneel to the Red Dragon god, they mostly treat the Red Dragon god as a spiritual symbol. They do not believe that there is a god in the world. The Red Dragon sect is like this, and so is the Church of Light, the top religion of the continent. There are also fanatics who truly believe in a god. Furthermore, the god lives in the sky above them, watching the world at all times. However, they do not believe that they will be able to see God in their lifetime. Humans believe in God, but there must be a distance between God and humans. This is the consensus of all human believers. However, you are different. Although you don't respect God on the surface, you believe in God the most. You give people the feeling that you really know the Red Dragon god and have seen him with your own eyes. Shadow thought to himself that he had not only seen him with his own eyes, he had even gone to the brothel with him, drank wine with him, killed people with him, helped the third prince pick up girls with him, helped the third prince rise to power with him, and even beat him up before Shadow glanced at Jilin. Jilin was squatting at the side and looking at the ground with full concentration. He turned a deaf ear to their conversation. Shadow felt that the reason why Jilin was so focused on the ground was because there was an ant nest on the ground. Jilin was always so serious when looking at ant nests, just like how he observed humans. Of course, this could also be said the other way around. Jilin observed humans like he was observing ant nests. On the principle of equality, Jilin was very similar to the gods in the legends. Shadow suddenly thought. Then he realized that he had been distracted for a long time. When he was around Jilin, he was always distracted. Perhaps it was because it was too safe that he relaxed. Shadow blinked hard and focused. He looked at Lei Sei and said, Lei Sei, you were a spy in the Red Dragon sect. It was a narrow escape. Of course. Lei Sei nodded. The Red Dragon sect placed great importance on this mission, but because of your betrayal, they failed at the last step and almost got wiped out. Once people find out, the Red Dragon sect will not let you go. Shadow said, if you didn't suddenly want to attack Rueyun City, I wouldn't have acted so hastily and exposed such a big flaw to you, Lei Sei said. The ownership of the city is the Empire's bottom line. Not a single inch can be lost. It was the Red Dragon sect. No, you went too far. The city has never been the bottom line. People are. The Divine Dragon Empire is rotten from top to bottom. It is not worth you going through water and treading on fire. You saw with your own eyes how the soldiers wantonly slaughtered the old, weak, and children. I don't believe that you will remain indifferent. Such a country should not exist. As Shadow spoke, his eyes suddenly turned red. Narrow-minded, the Divine Dragon Empire has more than tens of millions of citizens. The Empire's territory is more than tens of thousands of kilometers. Lei Sei suddenly became agitated, as if someone had stepped on his sore spot. What you saw is just the tip of the iceberg. The Red Dragon sect opinion is just a narrow generalization. What did you say? Shadow's voice trembled. The facts are all there. Are you still trying to quibble for the Divine Dragon Empire? The Empire has millions of soldiers. With so many soldiers, it is inevitable that there will be some differences. Is it strange that there will occasionally be one or two heartless scum? In this world, which empire dares to say that their army has never bullied the good? I admit that what you and I see is intolerable. However, in such a huge empire, this is just a small problem. What is there to be concerned about? What is there to be concerned about? Shadow's face was filled with disbelief. He had unsheathed his sword halfway. F*CKU. A small problem? Do you believe it yourself? If such a thing is really rare, how can the Red Dragon sect have so many believers? The Red Dragon sect would rather believe in a megalosaurus that could destroy the world than their empire. That is because the people are ignorant and have been bewitched by the evil sect. Bah, you beast! The villagers who risked their lives to protect you back then were also ignorant? Lacey fell silent because he really had nothing to say about this. I admit that the Empire does have problems, but it is far from being incurable, Lacey said after a moment of silence. I think you are the one who is incurable, Shadow said in a deep voice. Lacey sighed and did not pursue the matter. He said earnestly, "You want to overthrow the Empire after seeing a few people die tragically. However, have you thought about it? There are people who died because of the Empire, but there are even more people who are protected by the Empire. Compared to the latter, the former is not worth mentioning." Shadow was suddenly stunned. A few lives were not worth mentioning. He suddenly understood one thing. The people of the Empire, represented by Lacey, did not treat ordinary people as living people at all. They were just numbers. It was a number that could be compared with other things in terms of benefits. Seeing that Shadow didn't say anything, Reese continued, "Think about it. If the Red Dragon sect really rose up, there would be a lot of casualties and countless people would be killed. Moreover, Calm Wind Pass will not be able to hold on. The consequences will be unimaginable. If you don't want more innocent people to die, then the Empire must not fall into chaos." Ha! Shadow could not help but laugh coldly. What kind of F*King bullshit logic was this? On one side, you treat human lives like grass and don't treat them as people. On the other hand, you ask people to consider the big picture and not touch you. Shadow had really given up now and did not want to say anything more. He pointed at Jilin, who was still looking at the ant nest at the side. "It's okay. Don't worry. Even without the Divine Dragon Empire, the world will not fall into chaos because the Red Dragon sect has the Red Dragon God. If the oceanic races are really naturally afraid of dragons, our Red Dragon God, he could suppress Calm Wind Pass alone." Yu Ying's words were filled with lofty sentiments. This was unreasonable. Lacey remained silent because this time he really had nothing to say. Qilin abruptly raised his head and looked at Yu Ying. "What are you talking about, human?" Chapter 227. Reese looked at Hidden Shadow in silence for a long time. Jilin finally stood up and looked at Hidden Shadow, asking, "What Calm Wind Pass?" Hidden Shadow looked at Jilin and said maliciously, "Jilin, do you want to take over a human empire? What do I want that for?" Jilin asked with a frown. Reese could no longer endure the dangerous conversation between the two. He looked at Jilin and said, "I didn't expect you to actually exist. You know me?" Jilin raised his eyebrows. "Of course." Reese nodded and said, "A few years ago, my Divine Dragon Empire suddenly received a piece of news. It was rumored that traces of dragons appeared in Gerda Volcano, west of the Saimai Empire. His Majesty, the Hero King, immediately gave the order to send the strongest knight of the time, Tice, to lead an army to investigate. However, after Knight Captain Thetis led the army into the volcano, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no news. Since then, the Empire paid close attention to that volcano." Hidden Shadow nodded inwardly. He thought that Reese was much stronger than that city lord. He knew what to say and what not to say. When he said this, Lacey carefully avoided using the word Dragon Rider. Thetis was the Dragon Rider captain. The army he led was naturally the Dragon Rider squad. Thetis, when Qilin heard this name, he was stunned for a moment. This was the first human whose name he remembered. Even now, he still remembered it. This was because the humans' manners and actions were really like the heroes in human stories. Unfortunately, he wasn't a hero. Jilin even wanted to spare his life because of this, but that human didn't cherish it. Instead, he chose to fight with his life on the line for a glowing stone. He said it was for the knight's glory and that, You will never understand. What a pity. You know Thetis? Jilin asked. You know him too? Reese was astonished. He didn't expect this red dragon god to ask for his name before killing someone. Should he report later? What is the knight's glory? Jilin asked without thinking. Reese was taken aback by Jilin's sudden question and didn't know how to answer. Any human being who knew Jilin's true identity would inevitably feel nervous when talking to him. Although Lacey looked calm, the string in his heart had already been stretched taut. Seeing that he didn't answer, Jilin ignored him and turned to Yuing. What are you trying to do? Hurry up. Should we kill him or not? Okay. Shadow agreed. Reese, let me ask you, why didn't the storyteller appear? Where'd he go? He is not a citizen of the Divine Dragon Empire and is not under the Empire's jurisdiction. He can go wherever he wants. Why are you asking this? Reese appeared very natural when facing Shadow. Yuing sneered. Do you think people from the Middle Empire can go wherever they want in the Divine Dragon Empire? You still don't know. Do you think I'm stupid? How do you know he's from the Middle Empire? Reese asked. His storytelling is too good, Yuing said. Why did he come to Rueyin City? Why do you want Rueyin City? Reese asked. Yuing looked at Reese and sighed. It looks like I won't be able to get anything out of you. Although I'm not talented, I'm still a spy of the Empire. I carry the Empire's heavy responsibility. Why is Brother Yuing looking down on me? Reese asked. All right. Yuing nodded. Since that is the case, Yuing suddenly froze as if he was hesitating and struggling. Yuing stuttered for a long time and still didn't finish his sentence. Jilin grew impatient and took a step forward. Reese immediately focused as if he was facing a great enemy. Although he knew he wasn't a match for the Red Dragon God, he didn't plan on giving up. Even if it was useless, he still had to fight. For the elusive miracle and for the unwillingness to accept it. This was human. Forget it. Yuing suddenly shouted. You leave, huh? Reese and Jilin were both stunned. He almost burned you to death, Jilin said strangely as he looked at Yuing. Reese also looked at Yuing. Go and tell the Hero King that the Red Dragon sect wants Rueyin City. If you aren't afraid of death, feel free to send people to take it. We also want the Divine Dragon Empire. If he can't govern the Empire well, we'll get someone else. We have the Dragon God, so the Divine Dragon Empire's name is not in vain. Reese wasn't happy about escaping with his life. When he heard Yu Ying's arrogant words, he was already burning with anger. He said coldly, Impudent. Get someone else? You think it's so easy? If it's someone else, do you think the Divine Dragon Empire can instantly become peaceful? Who do you want to get? You? Of course I can't. Yuing knew his limits. Could it be him? Reese's voice trembled as he thought of a terrifying possibility. That's impossible, Yuing said decisively without even thinking. It was fine to worship Jilin as a god, but to make him the emperor? He was now the king of the Beastmen. Had he ever cared about the Beastmen? Then who is it? Reese finally heaved a small sigh of relief. No matter what, Yuing wasn't crazy. He didn't want the Red Dragon God to become the emperor. I don't know yet. You don't know? You don't even know this, and you want to... Reese was so shocked that he nearly laughed out loud. In troubled times, heroes are born. The times create heroes. We mortals only need to follow our hearts and do our best, following the will of heaven. When the time comes, someone will follow the will of heaven and become the emperor of the empire, Yuing said very seriously. Ridiculous. This is too ridiculous. Are you crazy? Reese shouted. Is it ridiculous for the empire's soldiers to slaughter their own citizens in broad daylight? Yuing shouted. You should leave quickly, Yuing said with a wave of his hand. Do you understand the seriousness of this matter? Reese did not move. I don't understand. I don't need to understand. Yuing said confidently. Then what do you understand? Right and wrong. Soldiers slaughtering citizens is wrong. How can there be only black and white in this world? Anyone who can say this is not a good person. Reese was almost choked to death by Yu Ying's insightful words. You're too naive. Reese sighed. A great man once said that great things always need a little naivety to push them forward. Yuing said. You guys haven't thought about anything yet, and you're about to do the biggest thing in the world. I asked you about your next plan and who the leader is. You told me to leave it to fate and that everything will work out when the time comes. Even if we're on different sides, I still have to say that this is obviously not possible. Why not? Ewing said, the future is unpredictable. No one can say for sure what will happen tomorrow, but we have to move forward. But you can't just walk blindly. No one dares to say that they can see the road ahead. Everyone is walking blindly. This is irresponsible to the citizens of the world. What kind of thing am I? How can I be responsible to the citizens of the world? Reese looked at Ewing. For the first time, he realized that he had never seen the boy he picked up clearly. This boy is too contradictory. It's even to the point of being twisted. He has the kindest side of human beings. He can't bear to see the weak suffer. He will lend a helping hand when strange villagers are in trouble. At times, he dares to clamor to overthrow the empire that is unfair to the weak. So much so that when he first met this person, he called him young hero. He is hot-blooded, righteous, and chivalrous. However, he also seemed to have the darkest side of human beings. When he schemed against others, he was incomparably sinister. Over the past year, many heroes and heroes had died in the shadow of his shadow. He dared to attack Ruiyun City during high tide. Everyone's criticism fell on deaf ears. Dragon Knights can scheme whenever they want. They have no psychological burden at all. Attacking the city is too troublesome. Then they will set it on fire. He is cold, dangerous, and unscrupulous. He wants to uphold justice for the sake of dozens of weak people. But for this justice, he dares to abandon the world without a care for the world. Reese suddenly felt that he was indeed unreasonable. Yu Ying's behavior was too contradictory. It was so contradictory that Reese felt a chill in his heart. Jilin narrowed his eyes and took another step forward. This human is too annoying. He has already wasted a lot of my time. I still have to rush to the Elven Island to take revenge. Ewing reached out and grabbed Jilin's wrist. Jilin glanced at him and didn't dare to move. He was afraid that if he moved carelessly, he would bump into Yu Ying and die. Yu Ying is still counting on me to negotiate with the Elven Queen. In the end, this human's body is not as easy as a dragon's. If you don't leave now, you won't be able to leave, Ewing said. I know that spies of the Empire like you never take your life seriously. But are you sure you don't want to spread the news of the Red Dragon God's arrival in the Divine Dragon Empire? Reese gave Ewing a deep look. He didn't say anything else and turned to leave. The Divine Dragon Empire was facing the threat of the Red Dragon God internally and the Rising Tide Sea Tribe externally. The news indeed needed to be spread as soon as possible. If I tell you to pass it to the Hero King, you must pass it on. Ewing shouted at Reese's back. Jilin looked at Yu Ying's back and felt a little surprised. Just now, he seemed to have seen Staya and Aisha's shadows appear behind Yu Ying at the same time. Moreover, they kept arguing. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Such absolute words should only be said by someone as righteous and pure as Staya. And such an irresponsible way of doing things like, what does the world have to do with me, was obviously the trademark of a witch like Aisha. The reason why Yu Ying had such a contradictory feeling that shocked Reese was that he had Staya's thoughts and also learned Aisha's behavior. Therefore, he could do something that neither of them could do. If it was Staya, she would probably have compromised when Reese mentioned the thousands of citizens under the Empire's protection. If it was Aisha, she wouldn't even get involved in this. Doing something that required a lot of effort and didn't benefit her was not her style. But Yu Ying, just as Jilin was looking at Yu Ying and thinking about humans, Yu Ying finally turned around and quickly let go of Jilin's wrist. Seeing that Jilin still didn't say a word, he asked, "What's wrong?" Jilin came back to his senses and said calmly, "Nothing, just don't touch me next time." "What's wrong?" "I'm afraid I'll kill you." "It's a pity." Chapter 228. Ewing blinked. He didn't understand what Jilin meant. What was a pity? Could it be that Jilin said it would be a pity if he died? Shadow could not help but feel delighted. However, after thinking about it, he could not smile. The reason was none other than that storyteller. That storyteller was the second strongest expert in Auspicious Cloud City. No matter how one looked at it, he should be an important figure. The matters of Auspicious Cloud City should be related to him. However, this time, Auspicious Cloud City experienced such a huge change, yet that storyteller was not there. This was very strange. Originally, if it were in the past, a Tier 6 expert would be worth Shadow's attention. However, now that Shadow had Jilin by his side, logically speaking, he should not have placed a Tier 6 expert in his eyes. Yet, Shadow was still so concerned. This was because he had two guesses about that storyteller's identity. First, that storyteller clearly came from the Middle Empire. However, why would someone from the Middle Empire come to such a remote city in the Divine Dragon Empire? There was nothing here. Second, this storyteller was a shadow guard from the Middle Empire. This meant that the Middle Empire's intelligence network had reached an insane level. There was actually a Tier 6 expert overseeing such a small city. If not, then there was only one possibility left. That storyteller also wanted to go to Elven Island. The information Shadow collected was not considered a secret in the Divine Dragon Empire. As long as one was willing, they could collect it. Since Shadow could sense that this was the beginning of the path to Elven Island, that storyteller might have found it as well. In that case, who could this storyteller be? Why would he want to go to Elven Island? Thinking up to this point, Shadow recalled a piece of news he once heard in the Middle Empire. What are you standing there for? Jilin patted Shadow's back when he saw Shadow's pensive expression. Oh, Shadow suddenly raised his head. Oh, nothing. When are we going to Elven Island? Jilin asked. Big brother, I am a human, Shadow wailed. Jilin sized up Shadow strangely and said, It is very obvious. However, don't try to claim that you are related to me. You are too shameless. Shadow was stunned. How am I shameless? People need to rest, Ewing said. The day after tomorrow, we'll go to the Elven Island. The next day, Ewing summoned all the red-robed men to discuss the various matters of entering Auspicious Cloud City. Now that Auspicious Cloud City had no city lord, the city lord token was in his hands, and the city's defenders had seen Jilin's divine dragon descending from the sky with their own eyes. They had no intention of defending the city. At this time, only 2 or 3 of them were left. Rue Cloud City could be considered to have been taken down. As expected, the Red Dragon sect easily entered Auspicious Cloud City. Then, he immediately painted the Divine Dragon Empire's azure Divine Dragon banner red at the top of Auspicious Cloud City. This was Shadow's idea. Instead of making a new one, they might as well change the color of the helmet. Since they were both dragons, no one would be able to tell the difference. It was fine as long as the message was conveyed. In fact, Shadow did not want to be so perfunctory. However, none of them knew how to paint. Take a look. What do you think? Ewing looked at the red dragon flag fluttering in the wind and asked Jilin proudly, What the hell is this? It's really ugly. Jilin disdained the flag. This is you, Ewing said. Do you want to die? Jilin asked. Ewing did not say anything else. This was because he could clearly sense that Jilin was not satisfied with this flag. That night, Ewing and the Red Dragon sect people discussed until the middle of the night. The moon was high in the sky. Ewing was not worried about Auspicious Cloud City. With Jilin as a deterrent, the Hero King would not dare to act rashly. For the time being, Auspicious Cloud City would be fine. Ewing would not let that traitor return for nothing. On the 3rd day, Ewing followed Jilin and quietly left the sea. Now, it was not easy for the Red Dragon sect's people to find out about Jilin's true identity. The Red Dragon God's descent was of great significance to the Red Dragon sect's people. Even Ewing could not predict how those people would react. It was very easy for it to lead to unexpected things. Hence, it was best not to act rashly. Since they had already walked down this path, with the dragon race's photographic memory, they would naturally be familiar with it. This time, it took less than half a day for Ewing to see the Elf Island from afar. This time, the Elven Island became hazy. The lush island was evenly shrouded in a thin layer of fog. Although the fog was light and thin, it was still enough to block the sight of humans. It was like a shy, gentle, and beautiful woman who came out after being called by thousands of people. She was still hugging a peepa to cover half of her face. It seemed that the Elf Queen did not wear this piece of cloth on her body today. Jilin thought silently. Be careful. Ying said, "If you accidentally kill any elf, there will be no room for discussion." "No need to say more," Jilin said. After Jilin finished speaking, he opened his mouth wide. The endless wind and clouds in the world surged into his stomach like a giant whale swallowing the sea. Dragon breath. Jilin, who was very far away, released a dragon breath at the elf island. He didn't even say a word, and he didn't even come face to face with him. Instead, he directly attacked with his strongest killing move. This was a sneak attack. The surging dragon breath was faster than lightning. In the blink of an eye, it landed on the elf island. It was a loud bang. The fog called flowing mist could block more than 100 stabs from Jilin. It could block Jilin's all-out punch that could shake heaven and earth. However, it could not block the dragon breath. Even Ying could feel the elf island trembling from Jilin's palm. One could imagine how shocking the power of that dragon breath was. The elf island is indeed extraordinary. Just when Ying was shocked by the dragon breath, Jilin seemed to be somewhat dissatisfied. "What do you mean?" Ying asked. "If it was a normal island of this size, it shouldn't be able to withstand my dragon breath," Jilin said. "It's already amazing that this island didn't sink." "Nonsense. Not only did this island have the invincible elf queen, but also had more than 50 godly artifacts. How could this be ordinary?" Ying complained in his mind, but he didn't say anything. However, he immediately discovered a strange problem. After releasing the dragon breath, Jilin didn't move. He was still looking at the elf island. However, that wasn't the plan. Their plan was to run away as soon as they saw the elven island from afar. They wouldn't even look back. "Why aren't you leaving?" Ying asked in a trembling voice. "I've been targeted. I can't leave now," Jilin said. "If I don't look at it from the front, I'm not confident that I can dodge it." Ying's heart suddenly jumped. He instantly thought of the elf queen's bow and arrow. The bow made from the world tree, sapling, and the golden arrow. He had miscalculated. Ying was extremely regretful. He didn't expect to be targeted here. Just as Ying thought this, a golden light flashed in the sky. Before Ying could get nervous, the meteor arrow had already arrived in front of Jilin. Ying didn't even have time to move his eyes, and Jilin had already dodged the arrow. The first thing Jilin did was to turn and leave. Chapter 229. Ying sat paralyzed in Jilin's palm, sweating profusely. He was still in shock, and his entire body couldn't stop trembling. The Elven Queen's arrow, just now, was aimed at Jilin. There was no doubt about that. What Ying suffered was the little bit exposed after being blocked by Jilin. But just this little bit made Ying feel that he had already died once. Facing death directly, it was as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. His body and mind were frozen. Ying only felt that facing the Elven Queen's arrow, it was as if the sky had collapsed, and he was standing under the sky with nowhere to run. There was no doubt that he would die. That was the power of a natural disaster. Jilin watched as Ying kept trembling in his hand, and he was also frightened. Jilin knew that Ying was frightened. This was normal. Facing the Elven Queen's arrow, no one would not be afraid. Not being afraid meant that they were not afraid of death. And being afraid of death was an instinct of humans as a living creature. Not to mention humans, even he was very frightened. So, being afraid was nothing. But he was afraid that Ying would be scared to the point of peeing. Jilin once heard his father tell him a story. It was about a very powerful monkey who fought his way up to the heaven realm and turned the heaven realm upside down. Many gods couldn't do anything. In the end, a Buddha came and subdued the monkey. The Buddha trapped the monkey in his palm, and the monkey peed on the Buddha's palm. The Buddha only smiled slightly and didn't care at all. He only punished the monkey for disturbing the heaven realm and suppressed him under the mountain for 500 years. Such a punishment couldn't even be called a punishment for what the monkey did. This meant that the Buddha was really not angry. Jilin didn't understand, so he asked his father. His father said that this was because the Buddha's realm was profound. There was no joy, no anger, no sorrow, and no joy. Jilin felt that this realm was indeed profound. He couldn't even understand it, so he definitely couldn't reach it. So in order to prevent himself from burning Ying to death in anger, Jilin quickly found a nearby island and landed. Jilin landed and turned into his human form. Naturally, Ewing also landed on the ground. "Why are you shaking?" Jilin asked in disgust when he saw that Shadow was still trembling. Then, Shadow ignored him. He turned his head around and looked around. Then, he staggered to his feet and walked to a big tree. He hugged the tree with both hands and slammed his head against the tree. It was as if he was possessed. Jilin narrowed his eyes as he watched this bizarre scene unfold before him. He understood that Shadow's spirit had been affected by the Elven Queen. His soul being shaken was also a thorny problem for the Dragon Clan. The souls of the Dragon Clan were innately powerful, and there was no spiritual attack in this world that could harm the Dragon Clan. Therefore, the Dragon Clan did not put much effort into the aspect of the soul. Their research in this area was not deep enough. Hence, Jilin did not have any good ideas about Shadow's current situation. They could only watch from the side, hoping that he wouldn't kill himself. As for whether or not he could recover, that would depend on the will of the heavens. The human soul was too weak. Jilin decided to spend half a day observing Shadow. If he still couldn't recover by himself in half a day, then there was no hope. Jilin made up his mind and sat down. He held his chin with one hand and looked at Shadow. Fortunately, Shadow didn't make Jilin wait for too long. After only half an hour, Shadow slowly woke up. The first thing he felt was that his head was wet. Shadow reached out and touched it. When he looked up, it was bright red. It was better if he didn't look. When he saw it, Shadow was shocked. Then he felt a sharp pain coming from his head. Ewing screamed and pressed his forehead. He saw Jilin sitting not far away, looking at him as if he was an idiot. "What happened to me?" Shadow couldn't understand. How could he be injured so badly by Jilin's side? "Your soul was attacked by that arrow, and your mind was damaged. You went crazy and slammed your head against the wall," Jilin said. "I slammed my head against the wall?" Shadow shouted. "Yes," Jilin replied. "Then you should have stopped me." Shadow was so angry that he almost cried. "You won't die," Jilin said helplessly. "And if you keep slamming your head against the wall, maybe you'll recover. See, isn't it fine now?" "What's fine?" Shadow felt that his wound was getting more and more painful. For a moment, he didn't know whether it was because of anger or psychological effects. "What should I do?" Shadow covered his wound for a while. After finding that it was really fine, he was relieved. "What do you mean?" Jilin said. "The Elf Queen could shoot you from so far away." "What should I do?" Shadow said angrily. "I don't believe you can dodge such a powerful arrow every time. I really don't have confidence," Jilin admitted unexpectedly. This caused Ewing to be taken aback as well. It's not Jilin's character to be this honest. "Then, do you have any ideas?" Shadow asked. "Then, should we go further away?" Jilin said. "Further away? How far away?" Shadow asked. "So far," Jilin said. You want to aim at the Elf Island from here." Shadow looked at Jilin in disbelief. Then, he looked in the direction of the Elf Island. There was no trace of the island. There was only seawater as far as the eye could see. Even if it was Jilin, Shadow didn't think that he could see the Elf Island from here. If they were to attack the Elf Island here, it would be a blind attack. Shadow felt that he must have thought wrong. Unfortunately, Jilin nodded, clearly telling him that he was not wrong. "Can you hit it?" Shadow asked. Then, he suddenly realized that he had asked a very stupid question. Since Jilin planned to attack here, he naturally had some confidence. "Probably." Unexpectedly, Jilin gave an ambiguous answer. Jilin's attitude made Shadow even more uneasy. "Then, can the Elf Queen aim at you?" Shadow asked a crucial question. "I don't think so." Jilin was a little uncertain, but it's worth a try. After all, the Elf Island is so big, and we're so small. It's obviously not on the same level of difficulty. We have the advantage. "What us? What us?" "Brother, do you have to take me with you?" "Who are you and who are you? How could I dare to be mentioned in the same breath as you?" Shadow couldn't help but complain in his heart. He didn't want to share the pain with Jilin at all. Then, he thought of another crucial question. "Are you confident that you won't hurt the elf tribe here?" Jilin paused. After a moment of silence, he slowly shook his head. "If we fight here, my dragon breath can only hit an approximate range. Even if it can't hit the elf island, it's normal to hit the sea." Shadow nodded. He understood what Jilin meant. Since it was possible to hit the sea, it was also possible to hit the center of the elf island and kill a bunch of elves. "Understood," Shadow said seriously. "Don't waste your time. I'll go directly." "Elf Island? What else?" "You'll die. There's no other way. You are really interesting." Chapter 230. Since Crimson Unicorn felt that Shadow was interesting, then it was probably true. Although it was the plan to have Jilin bomb the elf island first, and then have Shadow come to negotiate, this was the plan in advance. However, Jilin did not expect that Shadow would still dare to go alone after such a huge mental attack. This was no longer a case of knowing that there was a tiger in a mountain, but still going to the tiger's mountain. If one had to describe it, it should be called bravery. It was impossible for Shadow to know what Jilin was thinking. If he did, he would have been speechless. Shadow was not as brave as Jilin thought. He was also afraid, and not just a little afraid. This was not Shadow's original intention. It was a choice he made after weighing the pros and cons. This was the only way left after eliminating countless unreliable and high-risk options. Although this method was not low in risk. Leaving Stee to fend for herself was something that even the inhumane Crimson Lyn wouldn't do. Shadow felt that he couldn't do it either. Jilin wanted to shoot at the Elf Queen here. He was confident that he could attack the Elf Island. However, he was not sure if the Elf Queen could attack him. What if the Elf Queen could aim at Jilin from such a distance? What if Jilin could not block or dodge this time? Shadow did not think that he could survive. How big was this island? Other than hiding behind Jilin, where else could he hide? Therefore, Shadow thought that it was safer to go directly to the island. Jilin obviously would not go with him. He would not even get close to the Elf Island. Even if the Elf Queen was invincible, she would not let Jilin, a megalosaurus, into her home. Moreover, the Elven Queen looked at Crimson Lyn with deep hatred. Anyone with eyes could see that the Elf Queen had a grudge against the dragon race. After making up his mind, Shadow looked at the vast sea and began to worry about how he could get to the Elf Island. Jilin was strong, but Shadow did not believe that he could make a boat for himself on this deserted island. Yu Ying's face was gloomy, but this couldn't escape Jilin's eyes. After Jilin learned of Shadow's concerns, he smiled disdainfully. Although he didn't know how to build a boat, he couldn't even build a wooden raft. But this was not a problem for him. Jilin walked to the seaside. His golden eyes shone brightly, and the surging dragon might filled the world. However, this time, the dragon's might was not as oppressive as it usually was. In the past, Jilin's aura seemed to want to press people to the ground and grind them into dust. However, it was different this time. This time, it was as if it wanted to tell everyone that there was a dragon here. But the problem was there was no one else here besides him. The world was vast, but Shadow felt that there was nothing at all. From a human's point of view, there was nothing wrong with this. But from Jilin's point of view, this mistake was outrageous. Above the 9 heavens, countless birds and beasts spread their wings and soared high. Under the abyss, countless fishes and aquatic creatures swam freely. There were countless living beings in the world, but humans could always turn a blind eye to them. After a while, a huge fish broke through the surface of the water and floated up. Shadow had never seen such a huge fish before. He had lived in the Saimai Empire since he was young, and he had never even seen the sea before. It could even spray water on its head. Shadow saw a pillar of water shoot up into the sky, and then a rainbow appeared in front of him. A rainbow. It's a miracle. What kind of fish is this? Is it God's mount? It can actually summon a god. Shadow was stunned, and then he pointed at the rainbow and shouted excitedly. He had never seen a rainbow so close. After all, in the legends of the Saimai Empire, it was a mark left behind by the gods. Even after following Crimson Lyn for so long, Shadow's bad habit of being a citizen of the sacred empire still hadn't changed. Jilin reached out and grabbed Shadow, then raised his hand and threw him onto the back of the whale. Shadow was shocked. He couldn't care less about the mythological beast and hurriedly adjusted his body in the air. His body nimbly flipped, and he landed steadily on the whale's back. Shadow slowly straightened his body and steadied himself. Although the back of this big fish was extremely slippery, it was comparable to the moss-covered rocks in the Jade Spring in the Middle Empire's royal palace. Since Shadow could step on those rocks to practice his sword, he could naturally stand on this fish. "Let him send you to the Elf Island," Jilin said. "No matter how far the distance is, no matter how big the waves are, it won't be a problem for him." Shadow was a bit confused, and he didn't know why, but he felt that this was a bit unreliable. "Does it know the way?" Shadow asked. "This is a vast ocean, and if I lose it again, don't worry." Jilin was too lazy to explain anything. There were too many things in this world that humans couldn't understand. Humans saw the ocean as water, the bottomless abyss, and endless darkness. Fish saw the ocean as roads everywhere, and there was nothing they couldn't reach. There was no way to explain it. "I'm going back to the Red Dragon Palace now. If you're done here, I'll bring Staya to you. If you have anything else to say it now," Jilin suddenly said. "Is he asking me to say my last words?" Shadow complained in his mind, but he realized that he really did have something to say. If he was killed by the Elf Queen as soon as he got close to the Elf Island, he wouldn't be able to say anything, but suddenly asking a young human to say his last words, Shadow couldn't think of anything to say about himself. He could only talk about the things he hadn't done yet. "Have you heard of the Red Dragon sect?" Shadow asked. Jilin shook his head. "It's a religion that worships you." "Oh, most of them are a group of pitiful people, and their lives are very difficult." "So?" Jilin didn't understand. "If you want, help me take care of them." "No," Jilin said straightforwardly. "Ha!" Shadow sneered, thinking that the people of the Red Dragon sect were really blind. Of all things to believe in, they had to believe in this thing. "Then do me a small favor. If I die, help me protect the people in Rueyin City for a while, so that they have a chance to hide." 3 days. Jilin didn't know how long Shadow meant by a while. "Half a year." Shadow gritted his teeth. What could he do in 3 days? 7 days. Jilin said straightforwardly. 3 months. Don't go too far. Shadow was already anxious. Jilin didn't care at all and slowly shook his head. Shadow actually wanted him to waste nearly 100 days on insignificant humans. He really didn't know what he was thinking. Half a month, no more. "I'm about to die, and you're still bargaining with me?" 1 month, Shadow said angrily. Jilin thought about it and felt that Shadow's words were reasonable, so he finally nodded and said, "Okay." Shadow immediately let out a sigh of relief. "There's one more thing," Shadow said. "Why is there another?" Jilin was obviously impatient. "Do you know Comwind Pass?" Ewing was ready to throw caution to the wind. He didn't even look at Chi Lin's darkened face as he spoke. "I don't know. That is the humans' #1 pass in the world. It has resisted the water race of the endless sea for countless years. It has protected countless life forms. Didn't you come here to inquire about the Elven Islands? What kind of messy news was this? What does this have to do with you?" Jilin reprimanded Shadow for not doing his job properly for the past year. "This has nothing to do with me." Shadow was also angry. "However, it has a lot to do with you. I've never heard of it before. What does it have to do with me?" Jilin asked, feeling strange. Several decades ago, the Divine Dragon Empire had more than 40 flying dragons. The Divine Dragon Empire relied on this force to defend Comwind Pass. However, one day, the Divine Dragon Empire suddenly sent the flying dragons out on a secret mission. In the end, 20 flying dragons went missing. Where did they go? Others don't know, but you don't know? Shadow's words were powerful and resonant. This might be the first time he spoke so boldly before Jilin. This stunned Jilin. Of course, he knew where those 20 flying dragons were. They were still flying around the Red Dragon Palace. However, Shadow was not done speaking. With only 20-odd flying dragons left, the Divine Dragon Empire immediately fell into a difficult situation. It was barely enough. However, a few days ago, 2 more flying dragons, that's enough. Jilin raised his hand to stop Shadow. "I understand what you mean. However, Is it wrong for one person to kill 20 thieves who broke into his home? Shadow could not say anything against Jilin's reasonable words. He also knew that this matter had nothing to do with Jilin. Furthermore, Jilin was not wrong. However, Shadow still wanted to try and persuade Jilin to keep an eye on Calm Wind Pass so that countless humans could survive. A few days ago, one more Dragon Knight died than Shadow expected. Originally, he thought that one would come at most. Unexpectedly, two came. Shadow sighed and wanted to give up. He did not have the leverage to persuade Jilin to do such a big thing. Sure. However, to Yu Ying's surprise, Jilin actually said such a thing. Shadow felt stunned. Then he smiled and nodded heavily. With this, the world would be safe. Shadow also did not cause any trouble that would bring disaster to the world. Shadow could die with peace of mind. Then, Shadow left on the big fish. There was a sense of heroism, bleakness, and desolation, as if the wind was bleak and the water was cold. What Shadow did not know was that Jilin agreed to keep an eye on Rue, Cloud City's people, because of Shadow's face. However, Xiaochen only glanced at Calm Wind Pass because of Tiz. Heroes could always stir people's hearts, even if the other party was not human. Chapter 231. Elven Island. The Elven Queen sat on the pure white elven throne, her beautiful eyebrows slightly furrowed. It was rare for her to be worried. A day ago, that dragon breath landed on the Elven Island without any warning, but she didn't notice it due to her carelessness. She didn't use the mirror of the sky to reflect it back in time, and the arrow she shot out in anger also missed. But fortunately, no one was injured. The Elven Queen sensed all her people nearby and sighed helplessly. The Elven Island was very big, much bigger than what one could see outside. There weren't many elves, but there were still 1,000 or 2,000 of them. Now that the Elven Queen gathered all her people here, under the protection of the mirror of the sky, it was very safe to lock them up. But there was a saying among humans, if you don't steal, you're afraid of being remembered. There was no such thing as guarding against thieves for 1,000 miles. Just as the Elven Queen was hesitating whether she should pay the price, break the contract of the gods, leave the Elven Island, and kill that hateful red dragon with an arrow. Suddenly, the Elven Queen blinked her eyes. At this time, Ewing had already entered the Elven Island on the whale, and any life that entered the Elven Island couldn't escape the Elven Queen's detection. Without any warning, the Elven Queen disappeared from the throne without a sound. She disappeared just like that. The elves nearby didn't care at all. This was very normal for the Elven Queen who had a spatial artifact, so it wasn't worth making a fuss about. But still, some elves couldn't help but be curious. Where did the queen go? On the surface of the sea near the Elven Island, a faint mist gently floated. Although the mist was faint, the wind on the sea didn't blow it away at all. Ewing stood on the back of the big fish, feeling uneasy. He couldn't blame Ewing for being scared. After all, he was going through the Elven Queen's artifact, and his life was in her hands. Ewing clearly judged the situation and quickly pulled out 2 pieces of white cloth, one big and one small, from his waist. He bought this when he was in Rue Yun City, and this time he came to the Elven Island. He came prepared. The small piece of white cloth neatly wrapped around his forehead, blocking the scar on his head and his eyes. The shadow looked around through the white cloth, and the whole world became blurry. Ewing nodded in satisfaction. Then, a large piece of white cloth wrapped around the long sword at his waist. In this way, everyone could see that the sword could not be pulled out. Moreover, if he raised the sword, he could turn it into a white flag with a casual wave. At this point, all the preparations for Shadow's trip to the Elven Island had been completed. The only thing he wasn't sure about was whether the elves knew what the humans meant by waving the white flag. To prevent any accidents, Shadow stood on the back of the big fish and began to wave vigorously. He shouted, "Hey, is there someone? No, is there an elf? I am here to surrender. I have no enmity." Were there elves? Hey, this was probably the first time in the history of mankind that someone had shouted so loudly about surrendering in such a soul-stirring and righteous manner. How can you make such a big fuss on the Elven Island? Suddenly, a voice answered Yu Ying's question. Her voice was crisp and clear, like the sound of nature. Yu Ying's heart tightened, and he stopped shouting. He had heard this voice before. Although he had only heard it once, it was deeply engraved in his mind, because that was the voice of the Elven Queen. Yu Ying didn't expect that he would meet the Elven Queen so easily after coming to the Elven Island. Speaking of which, before this, the Elven Queen directly fought with Jilin, and Yu Ying didn't see any other elves. At this moment, a strange thought suddenly appeared in Yu Ying's mind. Could it be that the Elven Queen is the only elf on the Elven Island? Yu Ying looked around with his eyes covered by the white cloth, and he saw a blurry figure standing in front of him. Standing on the sparkling surface of the sea, the big fish suddenly stopped and almost threw Yu Ying into the water. I was still wondering how an outsider could come in from this path. So it's you again. The Elven Queen shook her head. How many humans have you brought to my Elven Island over the years? A loud whale cry sounded, and it hurt Yu Ying's ears. Yu Ying panicked. This fish had been fine all along, so why did it suddenly go crazy now? Why are you yelling at her? What if you make her angry? What if she kills all of us with a raise of her hand? Unexpectedly, although the Elven Queen was yelling at him, she didn't say anything to the big fish. She just smiled and said, "All right, I don't blame you. After all, you're a dragon. Although you're intelligent and powerful, you're still a beast. You have no choice but to obey the orders of the dragon race." Another whale cry sounded. "Let's go," the Elven Queen said. The big fish didn't dare to act rashly. It slowly sank and turned to leave. The dragon god ordered him to send people to the Elven Island, and he had done it. Fortunately, the Elven Queen was gentle and reasonable, and she didn't pursue the matter of him bringing people to the Elven Island without permission. This was the best outcome, as he didn't offend either side. He was sandwiched between the Elven Queen and the dragon god, and he was still able to escape unscathed. How fortunate! The big fish felt a lingering fear, and it quickly swam away. Yu Ying was left alone in the sea, shivering. The white flag that was made on the spot looked extremely miserable in the sea, like the legendary white trash. The Elven Queen hooked her finger, and Yu Ying flew out of the sea and floated in front of the Elven Queen. Yu Ying tried carefully, and sure enough, he couldn't even move a finger. How many years had it been since he had experienced the feeling of being pressured by a ghost? Yu Ying thought. Human. The Queen tilted her head and looked at him. Yu Ying wanted to speak, but he suddenly realized that he could move his mouth and tongue again. He opened his mouth and said, "Yes." "You're not an ordinary human," the Queen said. "Who are you? How did you make the red dragon send Xiao Bai to send you here?" Xiao Bai? Was she referring to that big fish? Yu Ying was a little dazed. At this moment, he suddenly remembered the crow that Aisha summoned with his hair. Aisha called him Xiao He. Could it be that there was no distinction between races in this world? Did all women name their animals in this style? I'm the human that was held in the hand of the Megalosaurus. Yu Ying forcibly pulled himself back from his thoughts and said seriously. He finally understood that the Elven Queen didn't remember who he was at all. He thought that the Elven Queen must have a photographic memory like Jilin and would definitely remember who he was, just like how he couldn't forget the Elven Queen after seeing her for the first time. But it turned out that it wasn't the case at all, but it was very understandable. When two high-level life forms of the same level were fighting to the death, who would have the time to look at the other person's dirty clothes? Suddenly, he felt the touch of solid ground. Yu Ying was stunned for a moment. He actually staggered and almost lost his balance. This was too abrupt. Yu Ying looked at the elven palace that was completely built with white stone and was shocked speechless. A moment ago, he was still in the sea, and now he was in the palace. Not even a little bit. What was this? Teleportation. But Aisha had to build a teleportation array when she teleported. This, while Yu Ying was still in shock, the Elven Queen had already spoken. State your intentions. Descendant of the dragon race, traitor of the human race. If your words don't satisfy me, then this will be the last time you bathe in the sun. Chapter 232. Shadow blinked. He felt that the Elven Queen was being too reserved. The surrounding elves were already in an uproar. They could not help but whisper among themselves. What was going on? The Queen went out for a trip, and no one knew where she went, but she actually brought back a living person. And what did the queen say this person was? A descendant of the dragon race? A traitor of the human race? How many years had it been since the end of the mythological era that he had not heard of such heinous crimes? The queen was really merciful. Why did the people of the dark faction say anything to him? They could have just killed him. This person is the human that the red dragon was holding. What? Shadow listened to those words and heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that there were still people who remembered him. Your Majesty, I'm not a traitor of the human race. I'm also not a descendant of the dragon race. I'm just an ordinary human. I'm just a friend of Jilin. Yuing said, I took the liberty to come here today because I want to tell Her Majesty the Elf Queen that Jilin doesn't have any ill intentions and that he has no choice but to visit the Elf Island. No ill intentions? A male elf said, outsiders are not allowed to enter the elven territory. This is the god's contract. You broke the god's contract and said you have no ill intentions. Has the human race fallen to such a state? Have you forgotten the god's contract? Moreover, that's the dragon race. A pure-blooded dragon race. That's a core member of the dark faction. You, a human, are staying with the dragon race. If you're not a traitor, then what are you? God's contract? Dark faction? Shadow had never heard of that before. That elf probably did not know that elves did not even exist, let alone the god's contract. Humans were still doubting the existence of elves. The extent of the human race's depravity was beyond the elves' imagination. That dragon spent a lot of effort to subdue Whitey and sent you here. I don't think it's as simple as sending you to your death. What does he want? Tell me. The elven queen raised her hand to stop the elf and said to Shadow, Your Majesty, Jilin would like to ask you to save someone. Yuing said bluntly. Save someone. Even the invincible elven queen could not help but doubt her own ears at this moment. Did she hear wrongly? To save someone. Shadow nodded and said in a deep voice, Is it a human? The elven queen was experienced and knowledgeable. She immediately determined that this was a problem unique to humans. As early as the mythological era, when humans and other races conversed, they would habitually refer to other races as humans. This had even led to many misunderstandings. Just in case, the elven queen asked again, It's a person. A human? It's a human. Is he also a traitor of the human race? A descendant of a dragon? This isn't it. Who is that? Princess of the Simai Empire, Saintess of the Church of Light, Staya. The Saint of Light? Saint of the Light. The elven queen understood. She nodded slightly and said, Human, you're here to die. Is this a provocation from the dragon tribe? I didn't expect that after so many years, the dragon race is still so idiotic. This. Shadow was dumbfounded. Some of the elves around him had already knocked their arrows. An intimidating aura locked onto dim Shadow. It seemed that the other elves felt that a weak and dirty human like Shadow was not worthy of dirtying the hands of their queen. Although this was the truth, humans often did not think this way. Why does your Majesty say this? Shadow hurriedly asked. Because what you said is ridiculous to the extreme. Why would the dragon race save people? They eat people. The elven queen's reason was so strong that Shadow did not know how to refute it. In a panic, he actually said, Dragons don't eat people anymore. Huh? All the elves were stunned. Their first reaction was, nonsense. Ridiculous. What a waste of time. Hurry up and kill him. Dragons don't eat people. Are they vegetarians? For a moment, the elven palace seemed to be in an uproar. This time, even the elven queen was serious. She looked at Shadow and asked seriously, You said that dragons don't eat people? No, Shadow said. Why? Shadow tilted his head and thought for a while. Then he stuttered and said, Because he said that they don't taste good. Not good. The elven queen frowned. Humans were the main characters of the world. They were born with extremely high spiritual intelligence. They were blessed by the gods and had countless divine lights in their bodies. To the dragon race of the dark faction, they were the most delicious food. How could they not taste good? Tell me the cause and effect in detail. The elven queen looked at Shadow and said seriously. This time, Shadow was in a dilemma. He thought to himself, which part of this is the cause, and which part of this is the consequence? Shadow thought about it again. What if he said something that angered the Elven Queen? Wouldn't he be beheaded immediately? If that was the case, this might be the last thing he said. If that was the case, then he would try to make it as long as possible. Therefore, Shadow started from when Ji-Lin fell from the sky and kidnapped the Saint of the Light in the sacred city. He continued until when Staya used God's descent and fought with Ji-Lin. Although Shadow had not experienced what happened before, Aisha had told him a few times in private. It was enough for him to tell the Elven Queen. "Human, is what you said true?" The Elven Queen listened quietly. Then she stood up and asked Shadow word by word. Shadow only felt a huge pressure. It was as if Mount Tai was pressing down on his mind. At that moment, Shadow's consciousness was on the verge of collapse. Under such circumstances, he could not be distracted and tell any lies. Shadow faced the Elven Queen through the white cloth. At this moment, it was as if he had to use all of his strength just to say a word. Every word is true. Shadow struggled to say. "Very good," the Elven Queen said. Then, with a thought, she removed the pressure that was as heavy as the mountains and seas. Yu Ying's heart lightened. With such a huge impact, his mind naturally couldn't bear it. He immediately rolled his eyes and fell to the ground, unconscious. The surrounding elves looked at each other. Finally, an elf walked to Shadow's side, turned his head, and opened his eyelids. The elf clearly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the situation hadn't reached the point where the queen had to personally kill someone. Although he was relieved, the other elves did not relax because of him. The atmosphere was still tense, because the Elven Queen, who was standing in front of the throne, still had a solemn expression. How many years had it been? How many years had it been since the queen had such an expression? "Your Majesty." The elf squatted beside Shadow, looked up at the queen, and said worriedly. The queen did not care about him. Instead, she was silent for a while and slowly said 4 words. "The Chaos Era." "Your Majesty, what did you say?" "The Chaos Era is about to begin." Chapter 233. Chaos Era. What is that? The elves in the palace all looked at each other blankly. As a result, they found the same blankness on their companions' faces. The palace on the Elven Island had never restricted the elves from entering and exiting. As long as they wanted to, any elf could come and go as they pleased as if they were at home. If the Elven Queen was free, she might even call out to him on a whim and have a friendly chat with him. Even so, the Elven Palace had never been so lively since it was built, because all the elves did not dare, even if the Elven Queen was as warm as the spring breeze and the sun when she faced them. They still did not dare. Many young elves who were less than 300 years old regarded the Elven Queen as the highest god and the Elven Palace as a sacred place. Therefore, the elves who could appear here were all the backbone of the elven race who were more than 1,000 years old. But even with their long lifespans, they did not understand what the Chaos Era that the Elven Queen was talking about. The Elven Queen saw the blankness of her people and said, "At the beginning of the world, black and white were mixed, light and darkness mixed together. At that time, the world had no order and rules, so the gods called it the Chaos Era. Later, when all living beings were born, light and darkness were opposed to each other for various reasons. Since then, the gods were divided into 2 camps. Then, they attacked each other and wanted to occupy the dominant position in the world. During this period, the gods called it the Holy War Era. In the end, the gods of the Light Camp won the final victory, and the world became bright and orderly. The gods of the Light Camp called the time after the Holy War Era the Eternal Era. Your Majesty, of the 5 guardian sacred pearls, 2 have been destroyed. I thought it was because the world had been stable for too long, so there were some disturbances. But I didn't expect the evil dragon came, and his power was unparalleled. As the main character of the world, humans became weak. The human Saintus was directly taken away by the Megalosaurus, and humans were powerless. Humans lost the favor of the gods and fell into the mud of the abyss. The dragon disdained to eat them. The ashes of the darkness were about to be reignited. They had great plans and tried to reverse the world. The boundary between white and black was no longer clear. Humans and the Megalosaurus called each other friends. All of this pointed to a fact. Eternity was about to end, and chaos would eventually come. After so many years, we only took a big circle? What a joke. Your Majesty, speak. The world is about to change. What should we do? Don't worry about it. Don't need to care. Even if the seawater reaches the sky, it won't be able to reach my elven island. But our ancient allies have long since betrayed our mutual agreement. Then are you going to save the saintess that this human is talking about? The elven queen pondered for a long time. Looking at the clear spring in the palace, she said, "She's the saint of light after all. It's not a big deal. I can't refuse. Your Majesty is merciful, but God's descent and sacrifice, it's all right. She's the saint of light after all. I see. Your Majesty is wise." In the darkness, Shadow's consciousness began to gradually recover. He felt very warm, as if he was soaking in a warm pool. Shadow tried to move his palm. No. Ewing instantly felt it. It wasn't as if he was, but rather his entire body was submerged in the warm water. But since that was the case, why did he feel so comfortable? How was he able to breathe so freely? Shadow opened his eyes. The green water was like a dream, constantly changing. Curved rays of light came into view. It was like the legendary aurora that only existed in the northern ice field. This was the light and shadow under the water. Shadow quickly stood up. Fortunately, the pool wasn't deep. After Shadow stood up, the water level was only around his waist. Shadow quickly scanned the surrounding environment and soon found a handsome elf by the pool who was staring at him coldly. "You're awake." The elf closed the book in his hand and looked down at Shadow. "What is this place? Am I dead?" Shadow asked. "This is the Elven Island. You're living very well. Or rather, it's hard for a life to die while soaking in the spring of life." The elf raised his eyebrows. Shadow couldn't believe that he was still alive. He pinched his face hard and felt a sharp pain. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. The spring of life? After Shadow reacted, he suddenly lowered his head and stared at the green pool. The spring of life that was extremely legendary and tempting. In many human legends, its shadow was vaguely hidden. It had many names and many miraculous effects. The legends were unreal, but they reflected a very real fact. That was the humans yearning for it. Many human emperors sent people out to sea to search for paradise in order to live forever. They were all looking for it. "Human," the elf called out and interrupted Shadow's shock. "Why are you so shocked? Didn't you and the Megalosaurus come to the Elven Island for the Spring of Life?" Shadow frowned. He didn't even know that this thing was on the Elven Island. If you didn't come for the Spring of Life, then what else in this world can heal an injury that even the sacred Book of Light can't heal? The elf was also very confused. "The Elf Queen is willing to help us heal Staya." Shadow's breathing quickened as his eyes lit up. "Yes. After all, she's the Saint of Light. Our queen can't just stand by and watch because of their friendship in ancient times." The elf said. Shadow was stunned. He didn't expect it to be so easy. Shadow was already prepared to agree to the Elf Queen's various conditions. He was even prepared to sell Jilin. It turned out that the Elf Queen didn't even want him. May I know the name of the Elf Queen?" Shadow asked. "Serene," the elf said. "Lord Serene, please help me tell Her Majesty the Elven Queen that Jilin and I are extremely grateful for the Elven tribe's help today. If there's anything we can do for you in the future, we'll do anything for you." Shadow's words were very similar to the Middle Empire's Jianghu. It was very open and generous. As an elf, Serene had probably never seen such a person, even though she had lived for thousands of years. She couldn't help but be stunned. Shadow was also very proud. He thought to himself that the gratitude in his heart was real. However, things like going through fire and water should be left to Jilin. This kind of thing was nothing to him. Jilin often bathed in the lava below the Red Dragon Palace. Going through fire and water, it was very appropriate. You should say this to Her Majesty personally." Serene laughed. "Her Majesty wants to see me." Shadow was stunned. He thought to himself that an insignificant human like him could actually be summoned by the Elf Queen twice. Her Majesty ordered me to wait for you here. Once you wake up, I'll bring you to see her, Serene said. Shadow didn't dare to delay. He immediately climbed out of the spring of life and said, "Let's go then." Oh, Serene was a little confused. "You don't want to soak for a while longer? What's there to soak for?" Shadow felt that the elf's words were really interesting. "Don't let Her Majesty wait for too long. Her Majesty won't be in a hurry. We elves have plenty of time." Serene said, "You, on the other hand, this is a rare opportunity for you." Shadow was stunned. He slowly extended his index finger. A white glow shot out from his fingertip, forming a ray of light that was about 2 palms wide and 1 finger thick. Energy release. This was the symbol of a stage 4 powerhouse. Shadow was shocked. He thought to himself, "I just soaked in the spring of life for a while, and I easily crossed the gap between stage 3 and stage 4. This elf brother's words were really too subtle. This kind of opportunity was more than rare. It was simply a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity." Shadow paused, blinked, and suppressed the shock in his heart. He took a deep breath and said to Serene, "Let's go and see Her Majesty." Serene looked at Shadow. This was the first time she looked at the human in front of her so seriously. Then she really laughed and said, "Even if the dragon's kin is extremely weak, you're really not ordinary." Chapter 234. Shadow couldn't help but feel a little sick. He thought to himself, "Are all elves praising people like this? What do you mean by extremely weak?" This young master's skills were not considered too weak in the human society. "All right. Okay, in that case, let's go," Serene said. Shadow could clearly feel that this elf's attitude was much better than before. Although this elf was polite to him before, and her smile was as warm as the spring breeze. However, what was hidden under that smile was a huge sense of distance, as cold and stiff as a glacier. It made Shadow feel that even if this elf smiled and suddenly raised her hand to kill him, it wouldn't be a surprise. At this point, Shadow had 2 clear judgments about the elves. First, the elves were really hostile to him. The descendants of the dragons, the betrayers of the humans. These things that sounded mysterious were really not just empty words. Second, the elves were too simple-minded. If he used human words with a little exaggeration, it could be classically described as pure as a piece of white paper. The elves were a dreamlike existence in human legends. They were the yearning of all humans. The most fundamental reason was that the elves had a near-eternal lifespan compared to humans. If the legends were true, then this elf in front of him couldn't be younger than 200 years old. A 200-year-old person couldn't even hide his true emotions well. In the eyes of Shadow, who was in his early 20s, this was something worth lamenting. Shadow suddenly remembered that Jilin once said such a thing. There were many animals in the world that were smarter than humans, but they were never more complicated than humans. Shadow now felt that these words were really reasonable. Humans had a hard life. Countless humans wantonly squandered the peerless wisdom bestowed by God and racked their brains. They only used it to scheme against their own kind and set each other up. Most people wanted to extract benefits from their own kind. What's more, they just wanted to show off their superior wisdom, establish their dominant position, and get some self-comfort. What's wrong? Serene took 2 steps and noticed that Shadow hadn't come up from the spring of life yet. So she turned back and asked, "Oh, nothing." Shadow quickly climbed up from the spring of life and caught up with Serene. "Lord Elf, how old are you?" Shadow said with a smile. "What do you mean?" Serene didn't understand. "How old are you this year?" This time, Shadow tried to make it as simple as possible. "Oh," Serene said, "according to the human's calculation, it should be 1,200 more than that. It's hard to calculate the change. Why are you asking this?" "It's nothing, I'm just asking. Humans always like to ask about other people's age. Please don't take offense." Shadow cupped his hands. As Shadow spoke, he began to sweat in his heart. He thought to himself that he had underestimated the other party by 1,000 years. "How old are you this year?" Serene asked casually. "This 25. Shadow's answer was a little vague. He was only 20 this year. Shadow didn't know why he added an extra 5 years. What followed was a period of silence, and the atmosphere was faintly a little awkward. Just like that, until Shadow followed Serene out of the hall and into the forest, neither of them said a word. If it was said that humans couldn't talk to each other after 10 years, then two people who were more than 1,100 years old really couldn't even open their mouths. "We are going directly to see Her Majesty the Queen?" Shadow couldn't help but ask when he saw that they had already entered the forest. "Yes." Serene's tone was obviously a lot stiffer. "Don't we need to inform her in advance?" Shadow asked. "Her Majesty knows everything. If Her Majesty wants to see you, you will naturally be able to see Her Majesty," Serene said. "Is it some kind of theurgy?" Shadow asked. "It's Her Majesty's power," Serene said. "The flowers, plants, and trees are Her Majesty's eyes and ears. When her body touches the branches, leaves, or steps on the grass, Her Majesty has already noticed you." "Power? Is it the legendary power that only the gods have?" Shadow was shocked. "There are too many human legends. Most of them are specious," Serene said. Shadow was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's true." After Shadow finished speaking, he took out a small white cloth from his pocket and covered his eyes again. The elves obviously didn't take him seriously, even if they thought that he was a descendant of the dragon. He didn't touch the things that he carried with him. Even the most conspicuous longsword was casually placed next to the Fountain of Life. "What are you doing? If you have an eye disease, the Fountain of Life should have cured it," Serene kindly reminded him. She thought that this human's eyesight had been bad for many years and had developed a habit over the years. Shadow thought to himself, "I can't tell you that Your Majesty is too good-looking. I'm afraid that I won't be able to control myself when I see Your Majesty later. If I lose my composure and anger Your Majesty, I'll be killed." Although he couldn't say this out loud, Shadow had learned from the literary leader, Mr. Ouyang, in the Middle Empire after all. This wasn't difficult for him. If it was the same, he could just say in another way. The Elven Queen is the embodiment of the beauty of heaven and earth. She is pure and bright. How can an ordinary person like me look directly at her? That's why I specially prepared a piece of white cloth to cover my filthy eyes. I don't want to offend Her Majesty and offend heaven and earth. "I'm terrified," Shadow said seriously. In fact, Lance didn't understand most of Shadow's words. However, he understood the general meaning. At the same time, he deeply agreed. Lance suddenly felt a little ashamed. He thought to himself, "Is my respect for Her Majesty less than an outsider's?" Lance led the way for Shadow with apprehension and shame. After that, he didn't say a single word until Lance brought Shadow into a white stone palace hidden in the depths of the forest. "Your Majesty, I've brought him here." Lance bent down and said to the Elven Queen who was standing beside a white stone platform. He didn't even dare to raise his head. Shadow looked around the stone palace. The stone palace wasn't big. It was circular in shape. It was about 20 meters in diameter. There weren't any pillars or anything inside the stone palace. There was only a circular stone platform in the middle. This stone palace was obviously not for people to live in. The Elven Queen walked to Serene and personally helped him up. The elves never had the rule of bowing when they saw the Queen. This was just a spontaneous behavior of some elves who didn't know when it started. Usually, the Elven Queen didn't care. However, this time, Serene bowed for a little too long. Serene was helped up by the Queen. He couldn't help but look directly at the Queen's perfect face. At this moment, he seemed to have understood what Shadow meant by fear. "You don't have to do that." Just as Serene was panicking, the Elven Queen said softly. However, he glanced at Shadow. She heard the conversation between Shadow and Serene in the forest word for word. Chapter 235. As soon as the Elf Queen finished her words, a gust of wind blew in the stone palace. There was a calming power in the wind. Shadow turned around and looked at the trees outside the stone palace. They were all standing there quietly without any movement. There was no such thing as the trees want to be still, but the wind won't stop. There was no wind outside, so this wind really came out of nowhere. Could this be the legendary words of law? Yu Ying's heart was filled with anxiety. No one knew what he was thinking. Serene, on the other hand, felt relaxed after being blown by the Queen's wind. The inexplicable uneasiness disappeared instantly. He understood the queen's meaning. Serene nodded slightly at the queen again and left. Human, your majesty, when will the saint of the light arrive? If I inform Jilin now, she will arrive the day after tomorrow at the latest. Very good. This time, it's all thanks to the elf clan's help. The saint of the light is our important partner. Jilin and I will be grateful for such a great favor. At this time, the elf clan doesn't need the gratitude of the dragon clan. Shadow was a little embarrassed. I hope your majesty won't blame me. If that's the case, why did your majesty save the saint of the light? It's just a small matter. Just take it as a remembrance of an old friend. The first saint of the light was so beautiful. She was like the moon. What a pity Shadow didn't know what to say. He knew about the first saint of the light. She was a well-known historical hero in the Saimai Empire. There was no one who didn't know about her. However, Shadow didn't know how many years had passed since the first saint of the light was alive. When the elders in the village told the children the legend of the saint of the light, the beginning of the story would always be a long, long time ago. The elders didn't know how long it was because their grandfather told them the same story when they were young. Now that the elf queen had spoken of such an ancient mythical figure and even said that it was a pity, Shadow really didn't know how to respond to that. Fortunately, the elf queen didn't expect to talk to Shadow. The queen pointed at the stone platform and said, "Come." Shadow quickly walked up and stood in front of the stone platform. Only then did he realize that there were 5 spherical gems the size of a human head on the stone platform. Most of the gems were shining, and there was an extremely complicated magic array engraved below. Shadow glanced at it and felt dizzy, so he quickly looked away. Ewing was shocked. There was still a layer of white cloth covering his body. If there wasn't this layer of white cloth, wouldn't he be lying on the ground? After following Jilin for so long, he knew that there were some things in this world that ordinary people couldn't even look at. It was perfectly normal for the Elven Queen to have such a thing. What is this? Ewing looked at it for a long time and recalled countless legends of the human race, but he really couldn't think of what it could be. "This is the world," said the queen. Shadow almost couldn't hold it in and laughed out loud. He of the light of the Shadow Queen. Was this a joke from the queen? Or was it a rhetorical technique unique to the elves? It was quite unique. Unfortunately, Shadow of the Light was completely wrong. Unlike humans, the elves didn't have such a large population base. They didn't need to pass exams or write essays to select outstanding talents to manage the people. Therefore, the elves didn't have the concept of rhetoric. The Elf Queen was born at the top of the world. She never thought about how to get along well with others like humans, so she wouldn't joke around. The queen glanced at him, obviously aware of Shadow's thoughts. The queen put her hand on a blue gem and said, "This is the most important thing for the elves. I didn't want to tell you, but the world is about to change. Chaos is about to descend. Darkness and light will begin to mix, and your position is very delicate. I don't know what you will do in the future, but it's not important. Just think of it as a casual move." The Elf Queen's eyes became deep and distant as she spoke. She gently raised her head, and her gaze seemed to have passed through the roof of the stone palace, crossed the sky, and reached the heavens. Shadow couldn't figure out if those words were meant for him. The Elf Queen was silent for a while. Finally, she slowly retracted her gaze and said directly without any warning or foreshadowing, "These 5 gems were personally crafted by the 5 supreme gods. They are the supreme world-class artifacts that protect the rules of the world." Shadow didn't react for a while. It wasn't until the Elf Queen said a long sentence that he realized what the Queen said seemed to be true. She didn't seem to be lying to him. "Your Majesty, please wait a moment," Shadow hurriedly said. Since this was true, he couldn't just let it go like this. This seemed to be a big deal. "You just said that these 5 gems protect the rules of the world. What are the rules of the world?" "Fundamental rules." "What do you mean by fundamental rules?" "The alternation of day and night has always been the same. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, the 4 seasons rotate. Fish will die when they leave the water. Tigers can't fly. The sun and moon will always hang in the sky and never set. The river will never flow backward. Humans dominate the world. Humans occupy more than half of the world, and it's decided by these 5 gems. It's decided by God. These 5 gems are so important? Of course. Doesn't this mean that the fate of the world is tied to these 5 gems? That are they sturdy? A world-class divine weapon is naturally extremely sturdy. Even that red dragon couldn't damage them. Your Majesty, but this one is cracked. Shadow pointed at the blue gem and said with a trembling voice, "That's why. The world is about to change. Humans should be aware of it." The Elf Queen seemed to sigh softly. However, that sigh was very soft. Shadow didn't seem to hear it clearly. This was because Shadow suddenly remembered something strange. The people from the Red Dragon sect had told him that the tide at Ping Fong Pass this year came early. It came earlier than the previous years. Then the Shadow pointed at the golden orb. There were a total of 5 gems. The other 4 glowed. Only this one was dim like an ordinary stone. It was obviously abnormal. This one is completely destroyed. Doesn't this mean that the world is about to face a great disaster? It's just returning to chaos. However, there's no need to worry too much. After all, there are still 3 gems that are intact. The array is still stable. Why are you telling me this? To give humans a chance to choose. Chapter 236. A chance to choose. Shadow repeated the Queen's words. That's right. The Queen nodded. The world is about to change greatly. As outstanding, intelligent creatures, humans should know what they are about to face. In the face of disaster, they should use their wisdom to make a choice for themselves, regardless of whether the choice is to resign themselves to death or to fight for survival. However, if they don't even know what they are about to face and die in a daze, it would be a waste of the wisdom that the gods have given to humans. Disaster? May I ask your Majesty, if these 5 god orbs are all? Shadow did not finish his sentence, but his meaning was obvious. The world will return to chaos, and the alternation of day and night will no longer be orderly. Sometimes a month will be night, and sometimes a year will be day. The world will no longer have the concept of 4 seasons. Stars will fall from time to time, and mountains will float in the sky. In the face of such a disaster, what choice do humans have? Although there are not many, there are still some. Please enlighten me, your Majesty. For example, to prevent these god orbs from being damaged. When Yu Ying heard this, he felt that it was nonsense. However, after thinking about it for a while, it did not seem to be nonsense. May I ask your Majesty, why is there a crack on this blue orb? Shadow asked. I'm not sure. It should be the time. Then why is there no light on this one? All of a sudden, the Elven Queen stopped talking. She only smiled meaningfully. However, Shadow could not see it clearly because of the white cloth in front of him. Your Majesty, Shadow called carefully. That red dragon, where is it now? The Queen suddenly asked. Shadow was stunned. He wondered why the Elven Queen changed the topic so abruptly. However, for some reason, Shadow felt that this way of speaking was somewhat familiar. Shadow thought for a while and said, "Just now, at the Spring of Life, when I learned that your Majesty was willing to help the Saint of Light, I had already informed Jolin to send the Saint here. You should have sent the Saint to the big fish by now." Then why did he go to the north? The Queen asked. Shadow frowned and thought about the general direction. The north of the island was... Shadow smiled and came to a conclusion. He said, he should have gone to Fairwind Pass. Fairwind Pass? Obviously, the Elven Queen had never heard of it. It is the customs built by the Divine Dragon Empire to defend against the sea race. It is extremely important. The lives of half of the Divine Dragon Empire's people depend on it, Yu Ying said. In front of the Elven Queen, he didn't have the nerve to say the world's first test. Resist the sea race. The Queen pondered for a moment. Why'd he go there? Because of some matters, I asked him to help me take a look. He surprisingly agreed. Shadow suddenly felt that something was wrong. He hesitated when he spoke. The Elf Queen sounded surprised for the first time. In other words, the Calmwind Pass is the place where humans and the Sea Tribe are fighting, and you sent that dragon to take care of it. Why, yes. Shadow was frightened by the elf queen's attitude and suddenly became nervous. Take care of what? Take care. Take care of Calm Wind Pass. Don't let the oceanic race take over, huh? The elven queen sneered and nodded. You're really a traitor of the human race. You're really something. Your Majesty, what do you mean? Once the red dragon goes, the oceanic race will definitely win. The endless ocean will spread to the land. This one will also be in imminent danger. The elven queen pointed at the green divine pearl. Why is that? Ewing was shocked. With Qilin here, Calm Wind Pass should be absolutely safe. Why? The queen asked. Because the oceanic race is naturally afraid of the dragon race. In the past, the Divine Dragon Empire only needed to send a few dozen flying dragons to guard Calm Wind Pass. If the flying dragons are already like this, then the oceanic race will definitely flee at the sight of Qilin. The endless ocean will be peaceful from then on. Haha, humans. I didn't expect them to still be so laughable after so many years. The elven queen laughed happily, looking very different from her usual image. If other fairies saw this scene, their eyeballs would probably fall out of their sockets. Your Majesty, why do you say that? Shadow was already feeling a little scared. All right, since the human race has already forgotten these things, I'll tell you. The Divine Dragon Empire was built by a dragon and a human. Coincidentally, that dragon was also a traitor of the dragon race. Endless ocean, Calm Wind Pass. The summer wind blew to its heart's content, making the sky as blue as a mirror. It looked like it had been washed by water, making the white clouds appear incomparably white. The sky was blue and the clouds were white. The warm wind was just right, and the weather was clear. It was a rare good day. If one only looked at the sky, the world seemed to be still peaceful, and the mountains and rivers were untouched. However, when one looked down, the endless ocean, which was magnificent and exceptionally beautiful in the past, had already become a true purgatory in the human world. The tragic scene was enough to make any warrior who had been on the battlefield for a long time tremble in fear just by looking at it. The endless ocean was densely packed with the oceanic race, bustling with activity. One couldn't see the end or the end of the oceanic race. It was endless. Every oceanic race member was abnormally ferocious. They had fish heads and human bodies, and they were extremely strong. They had fins between their fingers, and their bodies were covered in scales. They had sharp teeth, and their eyes were long and narrow. Their gazes were ferocious, as if they wanted to devour someone. They couldn't speak, so they could only roar in an extremely unpleasant and ear-piercing voice. Their voices were many times sharper than the cries of crows. It was as if the evil spirits in human legends were roaring for their lives. The roar of one oceanic race member was already so unpleasant to the ears. Now, there were as many oceanic race members as the sand in the Luo River. If ordinary soldiers weren't equipped with earplugs specially made by the Divine Dragon Empire, they probably wouldn't be able to withstand it and would faint in a few breaths. This was really an apocalyptic scene. Countless ferocious, evil spirits crawled out from the depths of hell. They roared and laughed sinisterly. They wanted to destroy the human world. The human race couldn't resist. They couldn't even withstand the cries of the evil spirits. They could only accept their tragic fate. This was a legend of the human race in ancient times. To be precise, it was a prophecy. It predicted the end of the world. Fortunately, most of the human legends were inaccurate. The human race built a high wall beside the abyss. The wall was tall and had no gaps. The evil spirits in the abyss couldn't climb up. The human race had brave warriors. They were brave and invincible, fighting with no regard for their own safety. The human race had the help of the Divine Dragon. Any evil spirits would instantly vanish under the purification of the dragon flames. The human race's ships flew in the sky. Cannon fire poured down like rain. This was a true portrayal of the human race resisting the rising tide. Countless soldiers were moving back and forth on top of Calm Wind Pass. They were holding their own weapons and shooting arrows into the sea. There were crossbows and arrows. The dwarves used energy cannons. The humans used cannons, defensive weapons, and incendiary bombs. Flying dragons soared in the sky. From time to time, they would spit out dragon flames. In the blink of an eye, they could clear an area of the sea. The golden warships of the Middle Empire moved majestically on the surface of the sea. They slowly advanced as if they were crushing the void. The weapons on the ships never stopped firing. Rivers and seas were overturned. The endless sea was boiling. Large areas of the sea were dyed red. The evil spirits from the abyss were still endless. Relying on the city wall, the megalosaurus, and the flying ships, the humans displayed their might. It was as if divine soldiers had descended from the sky. This was a mythical battlefield that should have been recorded in legends. Chapter 237. Humans were the creatures with the strongest adaptability in the world. No matter how bloody and tragic a scene was, they would gradually become accustomed to it after seeing it many times. That was the case for Boss. As the general guarding Pinkfong Pass, he would see such a scene once every year. Hence, Boss stood on top of the city wall, appearing very calm and steady. He had the demeanor of a general who would remain calm even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. Boss's face was gloomy as he carefully observed every detail of the battlefield. When the soldiers of Pinkfong Pass occasionally saw their general's expression, they were instantly alarmed and put in even more effort to kill the enemy. Boss's half-disfigured face looked even more unbearable than if his entire face was disfigured. Half of his face was intact, and half of his face was disfigured. Anyone who saw it would feel strange. They felt their hair stand on end. If Boss could scare a ghost when he walked on the street at night, his current expression could probably scare a ghost to tears. This battle was very tense, very tense. Boss had guarded Pinkfong Pass for more than 20 years. This was probably the most difficult time he had ever faced. This was because there were simply not enough Dragon Knights. Previously, there were still 20 Dragon Knights. However, 2 of them had gone to the south. Boss had thought that they would be able to return on the same day. Hence, he had not paid much attention to them. However, he had not expected them to die so inexplicably. The Dragon Knights of the Divine Dragon Empire actually died in their own empire's territory. Boss's teeth itched whenever he thought of this. If they wanted to die, they could have died at any time. Why did they have to choose this time? Now was the time when Pinkfong Pass needed Dragon Knights. There were not many of them in the first place. Now that 2 of them were missing, it was like adding fuel to the fire. If not for the fact that Boss was truly too busy right now, he really wanted to personally take action and investigate this matter. However, since they were already dead, there was no point in saying anything now. Boss looked at the 5 golden spaceships flying in the sky. These things were incomparably huge. When viewed from below, they covered the sky and covered the sun. Each spaceship seemed to be able to carry more than 10,000 people. They looked very powerful and were much stronger than the Dragon Knights. Now that they were firing at full power, they were even more earth-shattering. Those beasts in the sea could not even raise their heads. Seeing the might of the Middle Empire's golden flying ships, Boris could not help but let his imagination run wild. You said that the Divine Dragon Empire is the only one of the 5 great empires near the sea. Of course, the fishing industry was the most developed, and they had the largest number of ships in the world. But why couldn't any of them fly? If the Divine Dragon Empire could also make their ships fly, they would be able to board a few more of these big fellows. Bose felt that he could lead an army on an expedition to the sea. There was no need for them to stay here and wait for the oceanic race to attack them. However, Boris was only thinking about it. He knew that the Middle Empire could make ships fly, but how they did it was a big secret. Bose did not wish to overthink this issue. After all, so many years had passed. Bose knew that the Divine Dragon Empire had sent countless spies to the Middle Empire. Naturally, he did not harbor any hope for something that even the Divine Dragon Empire had failed to discover. "Why do you look so pale?" A voice suddenly sounded. Bose raised his remaining eyebrow. His expression was unsightly. This was a fact that did not need to be discussed. However, no one had ever mentioned it in front of him. Bose did not raise his eyebrow because he was angry. He had commanded Calm Wind Pass for so many years. He held military authority and protected half of the Empire's citizens. He even disregarded life and death. This was nothing to him. He just felt that it was a novelty. However, after he instantly determined who this person was, Bose lowered his eyebrow. It could even be described as submissive. Lady Flay. Bose turned his head and greeted her. The Middle Empire's golden warships are indeed worthy of their reputation. The largest dragon warship is probably comparable to an ordinary legend rank expert in terms of might alone, Flay commented on the golden warships. Flay started making comments about the golden warship. General Bose, this should be your first time seeing it, right? Yes, Bose replied with a nod. They are indeed powerful. This should also be the golden warship's first time coming to reinforce Calm Wind Pass, Flay said. Of course, Bose said. With such powerful reinforcements, why is General Bose still so gloomy? Flay asked. Naturally, I am worried about the battle situation, Bose said. Worried about the battle situation? Flay was astonished. According to what I know, our soldiers relied on the terrain of Calm Wind Pass and did not suffer any casualties. On the other hand, the Sea Tribe suffered disastrous casualties, and the seawater was dyed red. The battle situation is very good. What is there for you to worry about? Hee. Bose laughed bitterly. Lady Flay, look carefully. Even though the golden warships are very powerful, the Sea Tribe does not fear them. The only thing that the Sea Tribe fears is the Dragon Knights. When Flay heard this, her gaze turned grave, and she looked down carefully. As expected, Bose was right. The golden warships were indeed very powerful, and they possessed great destructive power. Usually, when an energy cannonball smashed down, it would instantly clear a region of the sea and cause countless Sea Tribe members to disappear. However, in the next instant, countless Sea Tribe members would fill up the empty region of the sea. They roared ferociously at the golden warships, waving their ferocious claws in vain. The Sea Tribe members seemed to believe that they would be able to pull down the monsters flying in the sky. They were stupid, but they did not show any fear. When Flay looked at the region where the Dragon Knights were flying, countless Sea Tribe members fled at the sight of them. As long as the Dragon Knights approached, the Sea Tribe members in the sea would instantly dive into the water and disappear. That is really the case, Flay said. No wonder you think so highly of the Dragon Knights. The flying dragons are indeed very effective against the Sea Tribe. However, even with the current situation, we still have a chance of victory, right? This time, Bose did not refute Flay. Instead, he said firmly, we will definitely win. The only problem is whether the victory will be miserable or not. Miserable? We have not lost a single soldier yet. Lady Flay, you don't think that the battle situation will continue like this until the high tide ends, right? If that is the case, why is it that less than 30% of our Calm Wind Pass's veterans remain? What's wrong? Now we have the high ground and completely occupy the airspace. The Sea Tribe can only take a beating. Lady Flay, these Sea Tribe members did not come to Calm Wind Pass to throw away their lives. They want to break through my Calm Wind Pass and slaughter my Divine Dragon Empire citizens. You mean that the Sea Tribe is not attacking at full force? That's right. The first few days before the high tide is the time for both sides to test each other. It has been like this for so many years. Can they still charge up the city walls? The Sea Tribe members are intelligent as well. There's no lack of experts among them. Bose said slowly, there are two types of Sea Tribe members. The first type is what you see before you. They are not intelligent and look like evil spirits. They only know how to kill and thirst for blood. There's also the other type of Sea Tribe members. At first glance, they look no different from humans. However, they have the characteristics of the Sea Tribe. They are exceptionally handsome and can speak the human language. They are extremely intelligent and strong. When they appear, the high tide will truly begin. When Flay heard this, she remained silent for a while. After a long time, she sighed and said, previously, I thought that Calm Wind Pass would be safe and would not need me to make a move. Hence, I did not come. Now that I think about it, as a legend, I should not have done that. Lady Flay, you speak too seriously. Now that you are here, it is not too late. Chapter 238. Boris's words were very interesting. It's not too late to come now. It probably meant that it was not too late to mend the pen after the sheep were lost. However, although it was not too late to mend the pen after the sheep were lost, some sheep would eventually die. Actually, it would be a lie to say that Boris did not have any opinions about Flay. This was because the legendary experts of the other empires had all contributed to their respective empires, some even risking their lives. Since the Middle Empire's Sword Saint stepped into the legendary stage, he had killed countless bandits, thieves, and demons with one sword strike. He had leveled the entire Middle Empire's underworld with one sword strike. Since then, there were no longer any self-proclaimed chivalrous people who used the name of robbing the rich to help the poor to wreak havoc. Although the fifth emperor of the Southern Exine Empire, Musin, was elusive and did not stay in the Southern Exine Empire all the time, his entire family behind him spilled blood for the Southern Exine Empire. Furthermore, the fifth emperor had never dropped the ball during crucial moments. Every time the Beastmen launched an all-out attack, Musin used his iron fists to block the legendary lion-headed Beast King. Although the Simai Empire's Pope was not a good person, the Church of Light was a huge organization. When had the Pope ever gone against the Sage Monarch? The entire empire was harmonious. Who would dare say that the Pope did not contribute to it? The legendary expert of the Snow Wind Empire had braved the snow and ice to guard the ice plains all year round for the Snow Wind Empire. As a result, a legendary expert like him was not famous on the continent. How great a sacrifice was that? However, when he came to our Divine Dragon Empire, look at him. He hid in the Scholar's Tower all year round and did not come out. He paid no attention to the outside world and only focused on cultivating the sage arts. Now, he finally came out. Yet, he created a Red Dragon sect. He specifically went against the Divine Dragon Empire. From the looks of it, he even had the ambition to destroy the Empire. To the Divine Dragon Empire, having such a legendary expert was better than not having him. Boris had guarded Calm Wind Pass for many years. It had been very tough, and many of his brothers had died. Although he had no complaints or regrets, he could not help but think about how many fewer people would have died if a legendary expert had helped. Fortunately, Flay was a legend of the Divine Dragon Empire. When Calm Wind Pass was in its most difficult time, she still lent a helping hand. When do you need me to take action? Flay seemed eager to give it a try. Looking at the countless monsters in the sea, she had the urge to boil the endless sea and turn all the sea creatures into stew. Don't worry. Bose hurriedly said, "We can still hold on for now. You don't have to do anything for now. At least, we have to wait until the high-level oceanic species appear." Flay sighed somewhat regretfully. However, she didn't say anything else. She only nodded and approved of Bao Si's decision. Although she was in the legendary realm, Bao Si was the true leader of Calm Wind Pass. Even if the Hero King came personally, it was likely the same. Flay was bored to death as she looked at the battlefield. To her, this was merely a one-sided massacre. Flay asked in a bewildered tone. "What's wrong?" Boris asked. "Look at that golden spaceship." Flay pointed at one of the spaceships. "It seems like there is a hole at the bottom of the spaceship." Bose was shocked. He hurriedly looked over. Although this golden flying ship didn't belong to him, he couldn't afford to lose it. As expected, there was a hole. After Bose saw it clearly, he immediately heaved a sigh of relief. That was because the hole wasn't big. Moreover, it was obvious that it had been repaired. It was obvious that it wasn't a temporary malfunction. Bose took a glance at Flay and silently praised the legendary realm. It was truly unfathomable. He clearly didn't notice such a small hole before. However, Flay was able to discover it with just a few glances. Could it be that after entering the legendary realm, one's eyesight would also be improved? Just as Bose was about to say something, a deep voice echoed from behind him and interrupted him. As expected of a legendary realm expert, I didn't expect that you would be able to discover this. The person who spoke was the great prince of the Middle Empire, Li Gui. Bose turned around and revealed a surprised expression. "Why are you here? Where should I be?" Li Gui's long hair was tied behind his back with a hemp rope. His eyes were drowsy. It was obvious that he had just woken up. "I thought that you would be there." Bose pointed at the largest golden spaceship. "What kind of joke is this?" Li Gui opened his eyes wide. To us, the sea race is an unknown enemy. Nothing is certain. In such a situation, we should first investigate the enemy's situation. How can we directly lead our troops in a battle? This seems reasonable. Why is that spaceship damaged? Flay was still troubled by this question. Did the Middle Empire send you over with this trash? Li Gui smiled faintly and didn't get angry. He pointed at the spaceship and said, although it's damaged, it's not a big problem. This is the work of a disciple of Sword Mountain. Disciple of Sword Mountain? Bose was shocked. Isn't Sword Mountain Lord Sword Saints? Li Gui knew what Bose was trying to say. He wanted to know why Sword Saint would draw his sword against the Middle Empire's army. However, he only smiled and used this perfunctory expression to tell Bose that it wasn't convenient for him to talk about this matter. Back then, Luo Fenghu and Ying led the southern town border army and fought against Qin Lan and her Jinshi army in the capital. At that time, Li Gui was under the protection of his own faction. He hid on the side and quietly observed the battle. It could be said that he had witnessed the entire process of the third prince forcing the emperor to abdicate. The big hole in the spaceship was created by a disciple of Sword Mountain. The elephant-class spaceship flew in the sky like a building in a palace. It was extremely huge. Compared to it, the disciples of Sword Mountain were like ants in front of an elephant. They were so small that they weren't even worth mentioning. However, such a small life form that was like a speck of dust suddenly soared up with a sword light and arrived at the bottom of the spaceship. Then, a sword light suddenly appeared. The sharp sword intent filled the sky and the earth. The sword light flashed and disappeared, but the spaceship was almost cut in half. Such a shocking scene would definitely cause everyone's eyeballs to pop out of their sockets if it happened in an ordinary place. However, in that battle, it didn't seem very eye-catching. This was because not far away, two legend rank experts were confronting each other. A red megalosaurus destroyed 5 dragon-class spaceships by itself. It was like a human child accidentally destroying his favorite toy. Even after the battle ended, Li Gui didn't manage to jump out and carry out his plan to fish in troubled waters. He wasn't the only one. He knew that his 10 or so younger brothers must have seen this battle. Their thoughts were probably similar to his. After all, they were all brothers of the same father, but different mothers. However, they didn't come out. Speaking of which, it was normal for the mantis to stalk the cicada while the oriole was lurking behind. However, the battle between the Kuan Peng and the megalosaurus was intense. Why was the oriole lurking behind them? Was he courting death? The oriole should hide far away and watch the show. Li Gui naturally couldn't tell Boris about this family situation in detail. After all, he couldn't wash his dirty linen in public. When Flay saw that Li Gui didn't say anything, she knew that this matter was related to the ascension of the new emperor of the Middle Empire. She knew that it wouldn't be good to ask, so she asked Boris, "When will those high-level members of the Sea Tribe come out? Let me know in advance so that I can prepare in advance." These words were just for show. He forcefully changed the topic to ease the awkwardness. After all, Flay's flame magic was the best among the human race. There was no one in the entire world who could compare to her. If she said that she needed to prepare before starting a fire, it would be too laughable. However, he didn't expect that this sentence would cause Boris to furrow his remaining eyebrow. According to past experience, those high-level members of the Sea Tribe should have appeared long ago. However, this time, they still hadn't made the slightest move. This was truly abnormal. I'm shameless enough to ask for a recommendation vote. Thank you, everyone. I wish everyone a happy winter solstice. I hope that the dumplings you'll eat will be filled with your favorite fillings. For all, for all, for all, for all, for all. Chapter 239. Bose had been guarding Calm Wind Pass for many years, and he was the highest commander. He overlooked the whole battlefield, and it could be said that he was the person who understood the Sea Tribe the most. But now, even he felt that something was amiss, and it could be seen how abnormal this situation was. The high-level Sea Tribe members hadn't appeared yet, and these low-level Sea Tribe members were being slaughtered. Bose didn't understand what this meant. But as a general, he knew that there must be a demon behind this abnormal situation. On the battlefield, an unknown and an unexpected were the reasons why an army was defeated like a mountain. What's wrong? Did something happen? Ligue saw that Bose was frowning and didn't speak, and his heart tightened, and he quickly asked. It doesn't matter. Bose waved his hand and shouted loudly. No matter what the Sea Tribe wants to do, we must defend this pass. We will stay here and wait for them to attack. This is the only way we can fight against the Sea Tribe. After all, we can't dive into the deep sea. We can only do few things, but this is also the reason why we can do what we can do well. We must make preparations, fortify the city wall, and welcome the storm. We will deal with whatever comes our way. We will remain motionless and let the wind come from all directions. Only when we are together with this wall can we be called Calm Wind Pass. Calm Wind Pass isn't a reef in the sea that can only bitterly endure the raging waves. We are a mountain in the sea, and no matter how strong the wind and rain are, we will still stand here. Because behind us is the Empire. Bose raised his right hand and shouted loudly. The Empire! Countless soldiers replied, and their voices were like thunder. They even suppressed the roars of the Sea Tribe members in the sea for a short moment. When Bose shouted these words in a roaring tone, Ligue and Flame knew that these words weren't directed at them. This was Bose's encouragement to all soldiers in Calm Wind Pass. The morale of the soldiers, which had already become somewhat numb, immediately soared. This was Bose's charm, and this was the prestige he had accumulated by guarding Calm Wind Pass for 20 years. At least half of the soldiers here had joined Calm Wind Pass because they admired Bose. Unmoving like a mountain, General Bose really has the style of a great general. Ligue gave Bose a thumbs up. Of course, Bose said bluntly. On the contrary, Ligue was stunned. Did you say the same thing last year? Fry asked. It's the same every year. Boss did not deny it. This works too. Flay opened her eyes wide. Wasn't this a little too perfunctory? Why don't you film those soldiers who are sick of hearing it and don't buy it? I've said it before. There aren't many old soldiers in Calm Wind Pass, so they won't mind, Boris said. She didn't know why, but after hearing Boris's words, Flay felt like crying. Who knew how many soldiers had heard Bao's speech before, and how many of them could hear it a second time? Maybe it wasn't that Boris was too lazy to change. He just didn't want to change. Now, when the soldiers heard these words, they would definitely reminisce about the past with a smile. In a trance, they would dream of the past. Last year, that fellow was right beside him, listening to the exact same words with him. But now, if that was the case, the veterans wouldn't just not care. Perhaps they would only care if Boss changed his words. A dignified legendary master was actually made to cry by a single sentence. That won't do, Fry said in her heart. She quickly suppressed her emotions and maintained her calm. After being silent for a long time, Flay's gaze swept past the soldiers fighting in Calm Wind Pass. She said, all of you are heroes. Of course. Boris said of course again. This time, he was even more impolite than the previous time. He even had a feeling that it was only right and proper. In fact, it was indeed so. On a sea an unknown distance away from Calm Wind Pass. The wind was gentle and the sun was bright. White clouds were leisurely floating in the sky. The blue sky was still the same. In the sky, seagulls were flying freely while emitting unpleasant cries. They were completely unrestrained. They were so free that it was as if the entire world belonged to them. The uninhabited sea was as beautiful as a fairy tale. However, the humans would never have thought that such an ordinary sea surface would actually be the headquarters of the sea race. The city of all things. The sea race believed that everything in the world was born from the sea. Thus, they called the sea the origin of all living things. The city of all things was different from the Elven Island. The city of all things had never appeared in any human legends. Even humans didn't know of its existence. That was because it was hidden in the endless deep sea. No human had ever been able to return to the land alive after going to such a deep sea. The city of all things had always been hidden in the deep sea. It never saw the light of day. However, when the city was built, The sea race had given it a function that had never been used before. That was, it could rise from the bottom of the sea to the surface of the sea. The waves on the surface of the sea began to become violent. The seagulls no longer had their previous expressions. They all flew away in panic. They could sense that something was about to appear. The surface of the sea split open. It was as if the heavens and earth were splitting open. A magnificent city slowly rose up. This was a style that had never been seen before by humans. In the entire city, there wasn't a single real window. Most of the buildings in the city were circular in shape. There were many tall buildings. However, the colors were very uniform. It was divided into several levels. The lowest level was the foundation of the city. It was completely dark green. It seemed to be made of some kind of stone. The higher one went, the lighter the color. At the very top, there was a crystal palace, like a gem embedded in a hat. The crystal palace was located at the very top of the city of all things. Compared to the entire city of all things, the crystal palace was only the tip of the iceberg. However, this tip of the iceberg was enough to make the entire city shine brightly. This was the first time that all things city had been exposed to the sun. It seemed to be emitting the light that had accumulated in the deep sea over the years. It was incomparably resplendent. However, the high-ranking members of the sea race in the Crystal Palace didn't appreciate this rare sight. Instead, they nervously looked at each other from time to time. Most of the time, they were looking at the sky, as if waiting for something. "It's here." Suddenly, an old man spoke up. This old man was wearing a blue robe and a crown on his head. His hair and beard were all white, but he was in high spirits. He didn't seem angry. There were patterns of ocean waves on his blue robe. It was unknown how those patterns had been embroidered, but they were extremely lifelike. When the sun shone on him, it was as if there really was an ocean on his body. This old man's status in the sea race wasn't low. When he spoke, the others became even more nervous. They all focused their gazes on the horizon. Not long after, a black shadow quietly appeared on the horizon and rapidly swooped down towards them. That black shadow flapped a pair of huge wings. From afar, it looked like a huge bird. However, the high-ranking members of the sea race knew that it wasn't a bird. With the old man leading the way, the sea race all lowered their heads and knelt down, waiting for that black shadow to descend. That black shadow came closer and closer. The sea race couldn't help but raise their heads to take a peek. The shock in their eyes couldn't be erased. That was because the black shadow had moved so far in such a short period of time. This time, the sea race couldn't help but look over. Gradually, they could see that the black shadow wasn't a bird. It had a pair of wings, but there were no feathers on its wings. It had thick limbs, sharp teeth, golden eyes, and red scales. Clusters of flames shot out from its mouth. It was a dragon. Jilin flapped his wings and landed steadily on the Crystal Palace. His feet firmly grabbed onto the roof of the Crystal Palace. Gotcha! 10 cracks appeared on the surface of the Crystal Palace at this moment. Even though they were shocked by Jilin's legendary figure, the sea race couldn't help but reveal a pained expression. Ever since 10,000 Origin City was built, the Crystal Palace was the supreme treasure of the sea race. It had never been damaged in the slightest. But today, the sea race looked at the 10 cracks and wanted to cry. They only felt that they were unfilial descendants. Did their ancestors' heirloom, which had been passed down for countless years, fall in the hands of their generation? Could it be that the dragon race was born to be a destructive race? All the sea race silently thought. Chapter 240. You're the ones who called me. Jilin's gaze penetrated through the roof of the Crystal Palace and was evenly distributed, shining on every high-level sea folk. Cold sweat gradually appeared on the foreheads of the sea folk, and even breathing became difficult. Being stared directly by such a huge creature, especially the violent Megalosaurus, they couldn't help but feel nervous. "Yes, Dragon God," the elder said, "we've taken the liberty to request an audience with you. Dragon God, please forgive us." "How did you call me?" Jilin squinted his eyes. This was the question he really wanted to know. Previously, he flew back to the Red Dragon Palace from the Endless Ocean and flew back with Staya the same way. After handing Staya to the big fish, he personally watched the big fish send Staya to the elf island. Only then did he plan to take a look at the calm wind pass that Shadow mentioned. However, who knew that halfway there, Jilin suddenly felt the depths of his bloodline throbbing. Jilin was instantly shocked. This was something that had never happened before. Furthermore, he felt that this throbbing actually had a source. Jilin didn't dare to delay, and immediately followed his feeling to find the source. This wasn't because Jilin was being petty. If someone could casually affect you from a great distance away, then no matter who it was, it wouldn't be taken lightly. Since he could make your bloodline throbbing a little, perhaps he could also make you die on the spot without any warning. Although this possibility was very small, Jilin still took it very seriously. After all, the longer a creature lived, the more afraid of death they were. Their lifespans were as long as the heavens, and they had to see the changes in the world and the flow of the galaxy. How could they take a little risk and play with creatures like you that would pass away in the blink of an eye? Therefore, Jilin decided that if these guys' answers didn't suit him, Jilin didn't mind burning them all to death. Not even ashes would be left. It was clear that the old man didn't expect Jilin to ask such a question. In the old man's opinion, this was something that didn't need to be said. But since Jilin had asked, the old man didn't dare to think too much. He was afraid that hesitating for a moment would anger the evil dragon. He hurriedly took out a blue scale from his sleeve and held it high above his head. This is the reason why we can summon the dragon god. The moment the old man took out the scale, the golden light in Jilin's eyes shone brightly, illuminating the entire crystal palace. Jilin watched with rapt attention. With the eyesight of a dragon, it could be said that he could see everything at such a short distance. Not a single tiny bump or crack on the scales could escape his eyes. However, Jilin still couldn't believe his own judgment. Jilin thought for a moment and exerted a little force in his legs. Voila! The roof of the crystal palace was reduced to rubble. The crystal shards fluttered in the air like snowflakes. Under the illumination of the sun, it was as beautiful as a dream. Jilin, who had transformed into a human, descended from the sky accompanied by countless crystals, like a god descending to earth. Jilin walked in front of the old man and took the scale from the old man's hand and rubbed it carefully. He was finally sure that this was a dragon scale. It was the scale of a megalosaurus that didn't lose out to him at all. And looking at the mottled traces on the dragon scale, he could tell that it had been there for countless years. Why was there a dragon scale here? Dragon scales could drop by themselves, but they couldn't fall into the hands of others. Unless, if the sea race relied on this thing to summon him, Jilin could accept it. "Get up. Why are you kneeling?" Jilin said. Since he didn't want to kill him, there was naturally no need to tire him out. "Thank you, dragon god." How did you get this dragon scale?" Jilin asked. "It was bestowed by the ancestor god," the old man said respectfully. "Water dragon?" "Yes. Ancestor god. What does your race have to do with my dragon ancestors?" "Dragon god. According to the legends, the sea race was born because of a single thought from the ancestor god. However, it's a long story. It's fine. I have plenty of time." "All right then. Legend has it that the ancestor god and the sea god have been friends for many years. However, the ancestor god was extremely powerful and wasn't convinced by the sea god. The sea god was similar. One day, the sea god said to the ancestor god that although he was indeed powerful, he was ultimately inferior to a god. With the ancestor god's pride, he naturally couldn't just let it go. Instead, he held the sea god back and insisted that he explain it clearly. The sea god couldn't shake him off and could only say that the gods controlled the world and created all living beings. It was something that other races couldn't compare to. When the ancestor god heard that, he became competitive and used all his strength to create the sea race. The ancestor god showed off to the sea god, but he was mocked. The sea god said that his creation was merely a ferocious beast, not a living being. After the sea god said that, he sublimated a few sea race members. These sea race members were instantly filled with intelligence. They looked handsome and resembled humans. These are the ancestors of our sea race. Lin listened to the old man's narration of the legends of the sea tribe. At the same time, he observed them. At first glance, these fellows didn't seem any different from humans. However, there were some characteristics of a sea tribe on them. For example, the old man had short blue fins behind his human ears. His arms that were hidden under his blue sleeves had tiny scales. All of this proved the old man's words, but most importantly, these people had a faint dragon bloodline, just like the wyverns. This was the reason why Lin didn't burn these creatures to ashes despite his uneasiness. All right, Lin casually found the highest chair and sat down, interrupting the old man's narration. Tell me, why did you call me here? For the sake of my dragon ancestors, if it's not too troublesome, let's talk about it later. Lin suddenly changed his words halfway, but the sea race elder clearly didn't notice this detail. The old man's voice was filled with emotion and sincerity. He prostrated himself on the ground again with tears streaming down his face as he shouted, I implore the dragon god to send down heavenly punishment to punish those who don't believe in us and eradicate all injustice. Set things right. Set the world right. Return justice to my sea race. Lin blinked his eyes and was truly stunned. He really didn't expect that these fellows, who looked like evil demons and ghosts in human legends, would say such righteous words. Lin was stunned. He thought that these fellows had some evil plan that couldn't be carried out, which was why they spent so much time and effort to seek his help from so far away. And where did these fellows learn to speak from? Aren't you sea race? The way you speak sounds like you're from the Third Prince's side. If he hadn't stayed in the Middle Empire for a while, he might not have understood what this old man was saying. Cough, cough. Lin coughed. Since that's the case, then this matter is easy to discuss. But let me ask you, who is the person you said you don't believe in? And what is this injustice? Replying the dragon god, those who don't believe in us are humans. The injustice is that the human race broke the contract and invaded the sea race's territory for no reason. The old man's voice trembled, and his eyes were filled with tears. He looked extremely wronged. Oh, Lin nodded in understanding, thinking that he wasn't wrong after all. These fellows still wanted to find trouble with the humans. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.